afternoon. Thank you and welcome to the March 20th, 2024 Oregon Public Defense Commission meeting. My name is Jennifer Nash. I am the chair of the commission. I apologize for the late start of the meeting. We were having some technical difficulties. This morning, we had a non-public session, a private retreat that, and we spent some time doing team building work and then had a state required training for boards and commissions. And now we open the public meeting, starting with a briefing from Moss Adams, Scott Simpson, and Jesse Lenhart, who are here to talk about organizational development, strategic planning, and habits of highly effective governing bodies. And with that, I'll turn it over to the presenters. Thank you.
Great. Just a moment here while we get our presentation pulled up. All right. Well, thanks for having us today. We're here to talk about strategic planning. And I'm Scott Simpson, I'm a partner with Moss Adams. I spent the first 20 years of my profession doing audits of governmental entities and have kind of transitioned into more of a consulting role over the last few years. I've worked with the commission for off and on for 4 years now. We did the Oregon report several years ago. We'll talk tomorrow about the 6-year plan, and then talking today about strategic planning. I have worked with other public defense organizations in other states, and so know a fair amount about Oregon and what's going on in a number of other states. Jesse, I'll let you introduce yourself and I'll talk about the rest of our team.
Great. Such a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you so much for having me here today. Jesse Lenhart, I'm a senior manager also with Moss Adams, and I am part of our strategy and operations team. So that focuses on anything related to organizational development that you could possibly imagine. So I have been brought in to really help partner with OPDC on some upcoming strategic work.
And one of the great things about working with Jesse is that I brought her in to help out on the 6-year plan with this commission. She started working with another public defense commission in another state. And so really we got Jesse involved in the commission's work, even though her primary program is organizational development. So it's going to fit really well. We have a couple of other people that you can see on the screen. Annie Rose, not with us today. Who will also help out. Colleen Rosilis is another partner in our consulting practice. Emily Hayes is going to be one of our data analysts. Emily has worked on the Oregon project, so is familiar with the commission, as is Annie Fadley. So that's that, and then Ben Tang. So that kind of rounds out our team. We're going to talk a little bit about the purpose and role of strategic planning. We're going to go through our process. We're going to have some time in here for questions. We're going to give a little bit of information on governance, and then some habits of highly effective governing organizations, governing bodies. So, strategic planning overview. What we have been brought in to do is help the commission create and develop a new strategic plan to help guide yourself over the next 5 years. The plan is to help the plan is designed to help establish a clear path forward, and really identify some goals that you're going to want to achieve over that time frame. And one of the distinctions I want to make when we started talking about this project, and we actually talked to some people in the legislature, there was real focus on transition planning. And we understand that transition planning is huge. But transition planning is part of this strategic planning process. If we were to just come in and do a transition plan, it would focus on just that transition and not some of maybe the overarching strategic goals of the commission. So the way that we're structuring this is we're going to focus on strategic planning of which one component is gonna be that transition planning and the changes in operations. So wanted to be very clear, we are gonna focus on those things, but it is gonna be incorporated under that umbrella of strategic plan. And Jesse, I'm gonna pass it off to you here.
Great. My mother loves it when I say this. I stand when I present because I have a lot of energy and was a theater kid. So here we go. This is, for those of you, I imagine several of you are really familiar with the strategic planning process, but we always like to assume that this is everybody's very first time ever doing this. So the way that we approach strategic planning really is in kind of this structure. So we start with establishing mission, vision, values. And so a lot of that conversation already started today, earlier this morning. We were talking about the role, the purpose, what we hope to achieve as being part of the commission when we really kind of start to identify and get on board with why we're here. What do we want this next little bit of time to look like? So the purpose, the vision, that mission, those values really are the grounding and that foundational piece. It's at the top of the pyramid, but it's a foundational piece to the strategic plan that's going to help inform everything that flows underneath it. So the strategic goals, objectives, performance measures, and operating plans. One of the other things that I heard as part of the discussion this morning really was an orientation towards, we're doing a lot. How can we get off of what feels like a crisis response wheel, start thinking ahead at what we need to do, be strategic about prioritizing what we're able to do, and set ourselves up not only for our long-term goals, but our short-term milestones. So the objectives, and then how can we measure how effective we are? How can we track our progress? How can we use this data to help inform reporting, to help communicate internally and externally, especially when we need to move the needle on some of these very big initiatives and other ones that are kind of small, like can we get a table of contents in our and Adobe on our iPads, right? So some of those things, how can we bring all of those pieces together to get some short-term wins, to get some midterm wins that are ultimately going to lead us towards some long-term achievement of our strategic goals? And then how can we build those into operating plans? So this is a very high-level overview of how we are conceptualizing and pulling together the parts of the strategic plan. So to bring all of these pieces together, this gives you an insight just into the process. So we go through each one of these steps. A lot of the work that we do really is grounded in a couple of our own goals. We want to make sure that the plan is actionable. There is nothing more defeating than putting a ton of work and energy and effort into contributing to a plan and having it sit on a shelf for a variety of reasons. So we follow this process to make sure that we're getting a broad range of input from people. We're identifying who those are right at the beginning. The process is also grounded in a lot of change management best practices. So communicating where we are now, what's happening next, really making sure that we're being diligent about guiding people through and collaborating with people through the process. So right off the bat, a proper plan prevents a lot of mess. So we get started with planning. If you set yourself up well, planning is going to make all of these kind of other pieces flow really, really naturally. So spend a lot of time in planning, then we go into discovery. And so this is where we just wrap our arms around all of the things that people are doing that we want to do. And then what are the priorities that people have over the next 5 years? So that's a discovery period. It's a lot of uncovering. We do that in a couple of different ways. So we set up interviews. A lot of those are going to be with OPDC, again, just to uncover what's all this stuff that are a normal part of operations. And then what are some of the higher initiatives? It's also going to include interviews with you all. We're very interested in hearing from you what your priorities are. When you think of the goals, the mission, the vision, where OPDC, yes, I said that right, is headed over the next 5 years. So after that big round of fact finding and discovery, then we facilitate a series of work sessions to go through each one of the strategic plan components, starting right at the top. So collaborating and having sessions not only with OPDC leadership, but also with you all to really align and build that vision, build the mission, and get some values on and included in the document. Then we take all of those pieces, put them into a draft, send that out to review, and then, launch, send it out into the public to get, their feedback on it as well. So the reason we do this, and I also heard this as part of the morning session, really is to avoid surprises. I don't know that I've loved a surprise since I was about 5 and had a surprise birthday party. In the professional world, usually surprises are never great. So we try to mitigate that as much as possible, really focusing on communication, giving you all a chance to review, provide feedback, be very clear about where we are and where we're going. So when we think about this, focuses in more closely on those discovery pieces. These are all the areas that we are looking at when we're thinking about what goes in and what gets considered in the development of a strategic plan. So those assessment pieces could include staffing. It also include the state of technology and systems and processes, how manual are things, all of those pieces that go into executing a lot of this work. We also look at finances, external factors, you all, right, governing body partners, agency staff, and leadership. So through all of these things, we work ourselves through the maze and put together a strategic plan. So what this looks like, we talked about our process, we talked a lot about the inputs, and so this is just a visual representation of some of the milestones that we track when we are going through this work. So that kickoff and orientation really is part of that planning. You'll see fact-finding and fieldwork, discovery activities, interviews, document review. We also have capabilities of doing a survey, and then you'll start to see those management work sessions, and then development of the draft all the way through to the end. So we anticipate the entire strategic planning process, including all of the rounds of review and fact-finding through and the work sessions that are part of the development process to last about 6 months. So like Scott said, we know that a really big part of this also is that transition plan. So typically when you're putting together a strategic plan, there's a discovery period around priorities, objectives, performance measures, really defining the activities. What do we need to do? Congratulations, we have strategic goal 1 already identified with each one of those activities already built out. So there isn't a discovery period around the transition plan. Senate Bill 337 really outlined for us all of the things that we need to do so we can get started on building out. Great, what are the resources we need? Who do we need to get in touch with? What exactly are the tactical components that go into executing that work? So that's how both of those things can happen together, and we don't have to wait 6 months in order for you all to get updates and for OPDC to start making progress towards executing and planning out some of those transition pieces. So for next steps, we have conducted an interim kickoff with OPDC. We've provided them and have already gotten that discovery piece started. So provided them with a document request list. We've received those and are starting to review them. Next up is where we start to put together the draft interview list. We'll review it with them and then start reaching out internally and then likely to you all to get your feedback on a strategic plan. So then after that, all of that work will fold into your very first work session, their very first work session. So congratulations, you have survived Strategic Planning Orientation 101. Any questions?
What part of the strategic plan would be inclusive of providers?
So providers are likely to show up in a couple of goal areas. And so we think about what is it about providers that we want to address? Is it, and so that if we're talking about the 6-year plan and some of those pieces, all of that kind of gets built in. But we want to make sure that we're dividing, what do we want to do? Where are we at now? And then what pieces do we want to move? What is going to be the responsibility of OPDC and where do we need partners? So it's possible, it's a very long-winded way of saying, it's possible that they will show up in a couple of strategic goals once the priorities are identified through that discovery period.
But shouldn't they also be included as part of the process to determine those goals?
The discovery,
Okay.
so reaching out to them, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, sure
Okay.
could be. Yeah, and that's where we could use things like focus groups, more surveys. Yeah, absolutely. Great question. you all.
It's a lot to think about, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. There, like I said, there's a really big commitment towards having this process be very collaborative. We are interested in maintaining really great communication. So if you have any other questions, by all means, happy to answer that, Eric.
Yeah, I just have a question maybe for some of the commissioners here. I mean, how long do you anticipate reaching out to them? Would your first engagement be in a group or one-on-one with them? Or-
Yeah, also good clarifying question. We do interviews with commission members one-on-one. They're typically a 30-minute interview, again, just to do that SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and then identification of your top priority areas. What initiatives do you have on your radar? What are some of the things that you would like to see the needle moved on? And so that typically takes place once we have the initial outreach. We try to keep those pretty consolidated within a 2-week period. So that's the timeframe. But then we will also reach out to you, with vision, mission, value reviews. Usually that's about an hour max as a workshop, and then to review the full draft. Which, depending on how fast you read, as lawyers, you may read very fast. I do not. Could take people different amounts of time.
One thing that I'll add is, when we do reach out to have one-on-one discussions with you, please be as open, honest with us as you can, because the more input that we get from you all, the better the product's gonna be. And the other thing, by reaching out and having one-on-one discussions, is we're able to identify some themes. And so if there are some themes that I'll just say are concerns that people have in the ability to create a strategic plan or the things that go into it, we're able to gather that information, kind of compile it, and then bring it back to the group for a larger discussion. If there are things that, really stand out and warrant, further input. So please, again, when we reach out, bring it all, the thoughts, concerns, that you have, ideas, because we really do and would appreciate all of that.
So I think that touches on my question to you. There may be commissioners and staff that have different ideas about the menu of services or how to go about it or caseloads or assignments. I'm assuming that'll be delved into during the interviews.
Yeah.
And it's not your job to decide what the solution is.
Nope.
It's your job to listen, figure out what the Overton window range of reasonable opinions are, I guess,
Yeah.
and to identify and allow the decisions made. Is that accurate?
That's exactly what you more eloquently said it than I did, but that's what I was trying to get at. Yeah, we're gonna hear a lot, and we're in a unique position where we can compile all that information and bring it back for an open discussion on it. We're not making the decision on what the priorities are. We're going to compile the information and present it back so that you guys can look at it and say, okay, that's what we all kind of said, or there may be some people saying, there's a few points in here that I think we need to have further discussion.
So you will draft a report. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll have.
And it'll go to the agency, I'm assuming, first. What's the process of drafting a report and going through there? And does the agency have input, editorial power on this, or does it come to us and raw information? I'd like to understand how this process is working.
Sure. Jesse, do you want to touch on that?
Yep. Okay. So here we have right across the top, all of those fact finding pieces, and that's where we will hear likely the kitchen sink of people's priorities, goals, and all of the different areas that folks have, again, that SWOT analysis. So then after that, what happens is we'll put together the first management work session, and included in that is an overview of themes. So this is, right, we'll take all the information and say, these are the things that we heard as top strengths, these are the things we heard as top threats. And go through each one of those, and then these are the things that we heard as key priorities. And then facilitate the process with you all of diving into and brainstorming, and then synthesizing that to say, is there anything that's missing? Like a lot of the stuff we did with Paul. Is there anything that's missing? Is there anything that's surprising? Is there anything where someone might have a different perspective or opinion? And facilitate the development of those goal areas, so the vision, mission, value, and then those goal areas with you all. Then, after that, we provide drafts of what that might be back to OPDC. They have a chance to review and say, yeah, it looks about right. Could we wordsmith this? This seems reflective. Have you asked or thought about these other pieces? Then what we do is we'll incorporate all of that feedback and then present it back to you as that check to say, does this look about right? Are there any concerns that you have? What did you think about, some of these other pieces? And then facilitate that process. And it is more of a consensus process. Into then diving into the next layer. So really goes incrementally through the biggest picture to the broad goals, down to the objectives, and okay, great, what activities make sense in a 5-year period in order to help us accomplish those broader goals. So at each one of those phases, so the mission, vision, values, and then the objectives, activities, and performance measures, drafts are provided. They're reviewed first by OPDC, and then they are reviewed by you all. And then we get to the full draft plan that then again gets reviewed by you all. And then also there's an opportunity to get feedback on that plan from the public to where folks would be able to say, I have questions about this, or what thoughts, or how is the following addressed? So it's a very iterative process as we're going through development of the plan. So then once we have all that feedback gathered, then the plan is adopted and finalized. Did that address any other questions come up through that description?
I'm looking at, I sort of get your color coded little chart here.
Oh, yeah. It's a little tough to see between the tan and the light gray, but yeah.
And real quick.
Yeah.
The work sessions are just agency leadership work sessions, no one else, you guys are, the consultants are engaged in that, but that does not involve the commission, is that correct?
Right, we will have separate commission work sessions because they are in a public meeting, built into the review process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great questions. And this is not, as I'm sure you have seen, the most detailed of every step. It's guiding the overall process, but happy to provide additional detailed reports and timelines again, as all of that gets solidified. So great questions. Anything else? Okay. So now, we're just gonna go into a little bit of kind of habits of highly effective governing bodies. So we know that, you all are a very fun group. So of all of the commissions, of all the city councils and all the commissions and all of the land that we have been part of, I'm very energized by the conversations that have happened thus far. So so a lot of this is going to be very not new for several of you, and stems from and goes to a deeper, more specific level to you all when we think back to the conversations that we had this morning. So at its most foundational level, right, governance really is, and you are all a body that helps make sound decisions and takes appropriate action to deliver on the mission in an effective and accountable manner. So heard both of those earlier this morning, thinking about how effective we are and how we're able to hold each other accountable, how we're able to use data to make good decisions and really kind of inform the path forward. And so again, at its most basic, a governance system and environment really is a combination of policies, technology, which we have today learned a lot about, and structures. So when we think about the roles and responsibilities of a governing body, again, this is at its most basic level, kind of what's expected of a governing body, in terms of its role and how it works in partnership with an agency. So, and again, a lot of this is gonna sound very familiar from what you all already identified this morning, right? So setting the framework, setting the direction, heard that from Jennifer. Ensuring accountability, providing goodwill and support for the organization. So at its most basic level, a lot of these pieces, again, no surprises, nothing new. So one of my favorite conversations to have, and what we always get with any governing body or council or board, is where is the sweet spot between being into the weeds, being too operationally focused, and being too high-minded, not necessarily paying attention and asking the good questions in order to help kind of craft and shape the direction and build the framework and inform the policies and those kinds of things. So what we have and what we actually include in a lot of our assessments is a very high-level breakdown of typically the roles and responsibilities and how these two bodies work together between kind of the commission and the agency, or more broadly, a governing body and a management team. So right off the bat, thinking of the commission or any governing body honestly is one that governs, guides, and directs, right? So thinking about ways and the role and how you show up as considering issues, monitoring progress, heard a lot about that this morning also, creating and reviewing and adopting strategic policy, operating ethically and with integrity. That was another piece. I think that's kind of a gimme, but always good to make sure that people are aware that we're expected to behave ethically. Providing oversight, requesting information, lots of good conversations about the balance of getting meaningful information. We live in a data-rich environment. What's really gonna make the most sense for us to make the most informed decisions moving forward, and kind of deciding what to implement. And then really thinking about the executive leadership, agency management as deciding how to implement, really operationally focused, developing recommendations to provide to you all, recommending, but then also implementing those policies, reporting on progress, acting in the public interest, again, operating ethically, but it really is oriented on the how. So then always kind of good to think about, what don't we typically do, or what falls outside of the typical role of a governing body? So again, you'll see that a lot of those are all very operationally focused. So administering policies, directing staff other than the executive director, abdicating your responsibility in all of those pieces. So I see a lot of head nods, no big surprises, but always good to have that refresher in there. And so then the role of staff, not setting the strategic policies, right, kind of recommending them and then implementing them. They don't direct you all, they don't assume your responsibilities or circumnavigate kind of the role and processes that are typically in place that would include you all in the development of any of the policies, plans, and kind of how the agency is directed to do its work. So this is also a list of some example roles and responsibilities of different governing bodies that again are likely not to be a surprise, and align with a lot of the things that are in place to really kind of guide and direct. So we don't have to spend a ton of time here, but if you kind of look at this list, is there anything that you all feel like is missing? Does it sound about right? Anything that you would want to call out as particularly important?
I'm just wondering, like, what's the feedback loop between all that we're doing and the public beyond just the public meetings in terms of like, and part of, I think what we're coming up against is that we don't do a very good job of publicizing like what we're doing, the progress that we're making, and I think that also extends to the legislature. And I know that we have discrete ways to do that, and there's roles that do that directly. But like, how do we leverage things like our website and social media to really speak to and shape the narrative of what we're trying to do here, and really let folks know like there's some energy here. Like, we've heard you, we're trying to implement, this is what we're doing, this is how you keep up.
Yeah. my 2 cent consultant advice is do a good old fashioned gap analysis. What are you doing? What is amiss? What are you trying to have do? And when was the last time you touched base with people to see where are you getting your information? Because I can try and give Scott updates on progress, but if I send it via carrier pigeon, he's not gonna get it, right? Or if I send it written, he's not gonna get it and it's gonna be out of date. Those are very extreme examples, but when you think about the ways that people get in touch and understand what's been going on, how can I contribute my feedback? Let's do an inventory. Okay, where is this already taking place? What do we need to keep doing? What should we stop doing? And what should we continue doing in order to kind of make sure that the message isn't just crafted, but also reaching the intended audience? And that's also something that is part of a discovery period and could be included in a strategic plan, as a goal.
I know you're talking about planning, but this is kind of, in that regard, the elephant in the room. And that is that we miss almost our entire constituency because the main people that we communicate with are contract administrators, not the actual line lawyers doing the work and not the clients. And so that's the big, I think, for communication, the biggest gap that we have. And some contract administrators, like some of them are here now, are much better with communicating with provide their own individual lawyers than others. And so, we do all of this work up here, and then people who it impacts don't know anything about it, or even how to access. They don't know what they don't know. They don't even know how to access the information, and we don't have a way to provide it to them.
I agree with that, and that when you said what's missing, I was thinking, communication with providers and maybe the clients, people being served, and making sure that we are open and have feedback to that so we can develop these policies and understand where we're falling short, possibly where the agency could pick it up. So I totally agree with that. That somewhere in there, I don't know where it falls, maybe it falls in one of these categories, but somewhere, I think Jennifer said feedback and communications with the people we are serving or supposed to be serving.
Yeah.
At least, as well as our providers, which are a key component of this system.
Yeah, making sure we're staying in touch with the people that we need to hear from. And part of that analysis, right, you talked a lot about providers and then also potentially clients. When you start mapping out who are the people that need to receive this information, who knows? Who else might pop up on the list? And then who knows what else people might or might not be receiving based on where things are showing up.
And I think communication will be key, especially as we transition to a model in which everyone we're looking at a life result in which we are no longer likely to have contracts and everyone's going to be hourly. Very important that we communicate with everyone and that the contractors are timely paid by PDS and that they're and that they know what to expect and that there's timely communication with them. So it's gonna be key.
I do groan at the number of emails that I send out daily, and I always have to remind myself that communication is king. It really just contributes to so much, avoidance of issues, escalation of stories that are unsubstantiated, or any number of things. It supports good change practices, it supports transparency. So yeah, I think focus on communication is great. Yeah.
So question, it's not for the agency. How does this process align with the development of your budget for 2025? Will this include this? If we have a strategic plan done in July, does that line up what we need to develop the budget for 2025?
Thank you for the question. So our agency requested budget needs to be approved by this body in our August commission meeting in order to line up for the 2025 session.
So we can't screw around, we gotta get this.
With the budget, you're going through that process right now, right?
we have started the process of going through the budget right now, so, the governor's office had asked us to provide them with copies of, preliminary ideas around POPs and LCs several months ago. We will be coming to the commission in May to talk about POP concepts with the commission. We'll be asking the commission to give the agency direction on what to move forward in our June commission meeting, and we'll be building that stuff out. We have some deadlines in the spring, and then, but the final version of the agency's requested budget will need to be, I think, August 30th is the date on that.
I looked at my Ways and Means guy, I thought that's gonna take.
See, if it fits with the governor's guidelines, it's good.
Okay.
And so when we're thinking about it, all of these sample roles and responsibilities, also good to ground these in a lot of the things that we've talked about, how we show up to these meetings, how we engage with one another can really help form and make a lot of carrying out these roles and responsibilities really successful. Great, so these are some characteristics that we always get asked when talking about. So what do I need to think about as a governing body in order to be really effective? You know, not just, I wanna have a purpose, I wanna think about when I show up, I know what I'm doing, what's expected of me. How can we really optimize this process in order to move forward really successfully, again, in partnership. So this is kind of an example of some pieces that come together that, congratulations, I already saw executed this morning. So thinking and acting really strategically, obviously, an orientation towards moving things forward as a whole versus kind of that individual prioritization of personal goals. So respecting, right, flows right into that next one, respecting the shared constituency. What do our stakeholders need? Heard a lot of that orientation here today also. So group decision-making, good processes around that. What does that look like? Honoring the partnership. Systemic and valid assessments of policy implementation. Not only do we enact it, but how are we checking in to make sure that it's achieving our intended outcomes? So a good old fashioned way just to make sure that if we do need to make any adjustments, we can, and we know exactly where those start. Evaluating performance and continuous personal learning and development as leaders. A lot of things that you may encounter might be new, either in subject matter or in topic. And so that pursuit of continuing education and learning is just really healthy part of kind of being an engaged governing. So when you think of this, anything else that you would add to the list?
It's another fine list.
Fine list. Excellent. Good. Yeah, today's been a day of lists. All right, another list. So thinking about the partnership, what does it really look like to have a very effective partnership and working together? So all of those right at the left, trust, respect, candor, and communication. Boom, right there. Communication grounds all of this. Heard some pieces about being able to be candid, having that interest in being able to be kind, even when we disagree, being able to be honest with one another, being able to not to be direct, and also in a way that is sensitive, so that, right, we don't have personal commitments to, you know, I'm just gonna say whatever is on my mind and that gives me free license to be rude. That isn't actually the case. We really want to make sure that we're able to be straightforward, we're able to communicate clearly, we're able to get the point across, and that really can help set clear expectations for how everybody can work together moving forward. And then that last one really grounds a lot of kind of those interactions. So reflecting thoughtfully on how expectations are communicated, how they are fulfilled, and staying curious about improvement opportunities throughout the process. Other than being a fine list, anything else that you would add, or is anything unexpected?
I think we actually spent a lot of time talking about that this morning,
Yeah.
what we needed from each other, so.
Yeah, if I usually have them, they're gold stickers, they're like little sheriff's badges, but they are, like first place, so everyone would get one. I left them in my other suitcase, but, yeah. Yeah, so legitimately, you should all give yourselves a really big pat on the back for having thought of these. Unusual. Okay, so, in your packets, you'll be able to see, if you're looking at this screen, it's a little bit, hidden, but these are also some practices when we're thinking about optimizing and being very effective in how we show up with one another, and making the most out of the time that you do have, because we know that we don't meet every day. And as much as we're able to email, making sure that when we have meetings, we're able to get through our agenda items, folks are able to come prepared. So these are some good practices to kind of keep in mind when you think about how you show up either as a regular meeting or during retreats. So things that can help your time together be as good as it can be is right at the beginning, setting clear objectives and that agenda. So gives folks an opportunity to be prepared, gives folks an idea of what's coming up, right? Since we were 5, no surprises has always been great. So then that really enables you all to be set up to start and end on time. So barring any other technology kind of issues, which in as much as it is 2024, it just is the nature of our environment. You have things work perfectly 100% of the time, literally every other day, but because the day ends in a Y, anything can come up. So, and to the extent possible, having objectives in that agenda will help you start and end on time. Fostering participation in communication, talked a lot about what success there looks like for groups. And then mission moments. So mission moments is a very fancy way of saying celebrating the small wins. So that was another big part of the discussion and really can help balance the full story of the work that is taking place. So we don't want to shortchange our accomplishments, and we also don't want to hide from areas that need work. So building out and telling that full story that is balanced and addresses both sides really can help paint a more accurate picture of how things are going. So then, identifying those mission moments, establishing those meeting agreements, again, guiding how we show up, using technology effectively, establishing roles and responsibilities, talked about those. And then at the end, I love a good what's next, right? So always thinking about leaning forward into the what's next, staying up to date, and then that can help kind of maintain that sense of momentum as we are going through this work. Really big orientation is towards how can we be effective? How can we move the needle? What change can we enact? What is what difference can we make moving forward? So follow-up and the action items are a great way to do that. And then just evaluating, always just doing a little check-in. Is it still working? Do we need to make any adjustments? Doing that on a regular basis really can help prevent issues from festering. So that can lead to any kind of disagreement or hinder your ability to come together as a group to make decisions. So regularly evaluating that process, identifying small things and making tweaks really can prevent small issues from becoming big ones. And then, of course, maintaining confidentiality. So to the extent that things are shared as a group, in a confidential space, really respecting that, and respecting that process. Again, it kind of goes without saying, but you may or may not be surprised, that it's important to really make sure that when things are discussed confidentially in accordance with all of the rules, as does happen and is a normal part of our work, respecting that when we leave the room is very important. All right. So this is an example of just kind of a meeting structure. We don't have to spend a ton of time here. You all are pretty developed in all of this. You know, Mona's done a really great job. We're really new to conducting meetings, but this just gives you an example of just kind of the flow if we ever get stuck on agenda items. Again, very unlikely, but can give you an overview of the most common things that you would expect to see in a board meeting or a commission meeting. Breaks, always good. All right, so that's it for you all today. Is there anything else? I imagine Again, very few surprises, but were there any kind of good takeaways or anything that really stuck out to you all when you think about kind of just that very base level understanding of why we're here, some effective habits, things that stood out to you at all?
Well, it's glad to see you say we're the best people you've ever worked with.
Yes.
So I appreciate that feedback. And the timeline you anticipate this being done by July, is that what this timeline says?
Yeah.
I want to understand that a little better.
For the whole strategic plan. And then the caveat there is that that does not, the transition planning work will already be taking place alongside it. But yes, the strategic plan,
Okay.
yes.
Transition planning is the one, movement over, transitioning the agency, the strategic plan is the service delivery system.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, great question.
Ask, do we have a prior strategic plan, to compare this one to?
Yes, our last strategic plan was done in 2016.
It was 15 adoption for 16 to 21. There are copies of it.
Yeah, so we can provide it to you during that time period, 2015, it was done. The service delivery model changed in 2020, and the executive director had changed during that time period as well. So while there is a previous strategic plan, I think the implementation of that strategic plan kind of got shelved.
There were 3 executive directors during that time, right?
There were, yeah, something like that.
It seems ambitious to me. And it seems like it's going to require more than one commission meeting a month between now and June. So are we planning for that? Are we gonna have some kind of calendar with some dates that we can actually make sure that we reserve for any additional meetings that we're gonna have to have? Because it seems to me, given the pace I've experienced so far since January, so I wasn't on the old commission, I think that seems really ambitious.
Yeah.
And if we are gonna have to have more than a meeting a month, I would like to get those on my calendar.
Yeah. So clarifying question, when you talk about ambition, are you thinking of the strategic planning process or both strategic plan and updates on the transition plan?
Yes.
Both. Yes. All, see, all of the above.
Well,
Yeah,
because that's all part of we're gonna be done by June.
yeah.
So yes, all of the above. I'd like to know how we're gonna accomplish getting it done by June.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and we're working with Lisa, who might be able to help provide extra context about how information is showing up, the reports that we're making, the cadence, and then the expectations for your engagement. So thinking about the interviews and then also the review time and how that shows up in the
And the
meetings.
discussion time, I mean,
Well, I hadn't thought about that, actually. You know, our meetings are scheduled from 10 to 2. And or slightly longer, and it might make more sense. It doesn't sound like we need to be very involved in engagement in terms of providing you with information. There are milestones and places where you need us to be involved, but we need to be informed. So maybe if we just extended the time of our meetings, I know nobody wants to spend lots of, but we're already here.
yeah.
Instead of scheduling other meetings, because I will say from my perspective, when we schedule extra meetings, it does lead to that frenetic, we're always in crisis mode. And it makes it a much more stressful situation. And it's a lot more work for the agency. They can't get day-to-day things that they need to do done because they're always planning for a public meeting. So my thought is that maybe we just extend the time we have to be able to add to the agenda items, updates on the strategic planning
So
process.
3 hours instead of 2.
Well, we're
4
always
hours,
at
5 hours
4.
instead of 4.
Yeah, I mean, 10
Full day
instead of 10 to
meetings.
2, 10 to, right,
Yeah.
right. So that's a thought that for us to think about and discuss.
Well, one advantage of that is that you have some continuity. A disadvantage of that is it doesn't give you time to go back and reflect on what was said in the meeting and think about contributions and then come back refreshed in a sense, to pick it up again, so I think you're right, it's easier to schedule an additional hour or two because you're already not doing much else that day.
Right.
But, it might be important to think about how we, manage to have some reflection time. And maybe you can reflect on the written part. But, I know when I leave and think about the conversation, I come up with new ideas and reactions, and I need that sometimes.
I also offer that as coming out of the last legislative session, the legislature directed us to create a new report, quarterly report on our transition planning initiatives. And so the first of those reports is due during May legislative days. And so this body will have in front of it in the April commission meeting, the report. So there will be some formality to the way that we're bringing this back for your review and input as well.
You will also, you bring up a really good question, and we'll strategize to see if there's maybe some ways that we can think of to communicate some things in advance of those meetings so that you have some time to digest some of the information in advance of coming and hearing it kind of for the first time, and then a day later saying, oh gosh, I have a great question.
Excellent.
Yeah, so,
Agreed.
yeah, we'll see what we can figure out as a method to do that.
Yeah, it was quite helpful to have all your materials in advance of this meeting. I was able to follow it on my computer reading it.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone, for having us here today. We're looking forward to working with you. Yes.
Questions, I was trying to find it, scrolling through.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we have been given an Oregon Public Defense Commission 6-year plan to reduce representation and efficiency. How does that fit into
Yes.
your work?
The 5-year plan.
Yes, that's the
5-year
plan.
plan.
Fit it in the 5-year plan because
Is there
Yeah.
an 11-year plan?
Yeah.
We only do even numbers because biennial budgets.
Yeah, but I think that was the 6-year plan, I think was prepared by the agency and the fixed amendment.
With Moss Adams,
With
actually.
their- So we prepared the 6-year plan. Yeah, we got there, obviously a lot of input, but
Right, so is that part of this 5-year plan? Is the data coming through the 5-year plan, or is it adopted as part of it? How do they interplay?
Yeah, the short answer is that they do. So, the 6-year plan is any kind of any next steps from that are gonna be decided on and then incorporated into what most likely will show up as a goal in the strategic plan, as we would like to enhance service delivery and meet the needs of our stakeholders, fulfill our constitutional mandate, those pieces. So it all is gonna come together. But that's a really good illustration of how strategic plan can help inform the future work. So,
So quick question on, so, and I think this is the document that had FTEs of 2,080 hours, that's how you made the determination. Use your caseload study, use the Delphi study hours, which are not 2,080 hours. Right?
Actually, can I just step in here and say, we're going to discuss that fully in a public meeting tomorrow. And
Okay.
it might be better to table that specific question to that portion of the meeting because of the public comment issue.
Okay,
Because I have that question too, actually, but tomorrow seems like
and we'll both be here
appropriate
tomorrow
place.
for that,
okay.
to discuss that, yeah.
All right, are there other questions or comments regarding the overview of strategic planning and what the process will be? All right, we're ahead of schedule for once, which means we can have a more robust discussion about the bylaws. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And if you would like, we could take a break, a little bit of a break before we start in on the bylaws. All right, so let's for 15 minutes. We'll be back at 1:15. 2:15, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm looking right at my watch while I say that. It's so hot. Yeah. I've been- Welcome back to the Oregon Public Defense Commission meeting after a break. We are moving on a bit early to discussion regarding the OPDC bylaws. We will not be taking any action on that before the 3:15 time that is allotted on the agenda to ensure that it's noticed properly, but we are going to start the discussion and are grateful that we have extra time because we didn't think that we could have a full discussion in an hour. So I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Mandelberg and Eric Dietrich, General Counsel.
Thank you, Chair Nash. I'd like to start by thanking the members of the governance subcommittee who all worked hard on this. So that's Commissioner Parrish Taylor, Commissioner Wright, Commissioner Smith, and Commissioner Harris. So the governance subcommittee has met 3 times, February 1st, February 29th, and March 4th. The first meeting, we discussed just in general what we thought the bylaws needed to cover. Eric Dietrich and I put together a draft, which the committee considered on February 29th. We had a very wide-ranging discussion, and based on that discussion, we amended that draft, put together a second draft, which the committee discussed on March 14th. And again, another wide-ranging discussion. And the initial draft that you all got in your materials and that was posted on the website was the one that came out of the February 29th meeting. And the earliest we could get the amended draft from last week's meeting was, I think, Monday. And that's the final one that you got. So that's the one we're going to be discussing today. These draft bylaws are considerably much more detailed than the bylaws that were governing the previous commission. Part of the reason for that is that now that the staff and the commission are lumped together under one title, OPDC, we thought it was very important in the bylaws to clarify the lines of authority and responsibility so that it would be right out there and we wouldn't have to second guess and the staff wouldn't have to second guess who was in charge of what. We also wanted to address what we considered and what we had heard from others were considered to be major situations that would raise structural and procedural issues so that there would already be a solution to the ones that we could anticipate and we wouldn't have to create the rules as we went forward to the extent possible. So we tried to anticipate situations. This is labeled an action item on our agenda, but I am anticipating that we probably won't be ready to take a vote on it today. I've already heard from a number of people that they have issues and questions. And although we now have a little bit more time than we had before to discuss it, I don't think we should feel rushed into adopting a document that's so foundational to what we're going to do, and then have to end up amending it far too soon. We don't want to have to get into this conversation again. So I just want to say that I'm fully comfortable with not having a vote on it today, and I believe Mr. Dietrich is also comfortable with that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. There are, what I'd like to do, because I think it was effective as we worked through it as a subcommittee, is go through the articles and the sections in order. And for the ones that aren't really obvious, explain what it is that we were trying to do. And then if people have comments or questions, I think we can address those in an orderly way. So that's okay with everybody? Article 1 the agency name, authority, mission, and basic definitions. So I think sections 1 and 2 are very clear. Section 3, subsection A sets out our basic mission to establish and maintain the public defense system, etc. Subsection B basically takes the major chores that are mentioned in ORS 151.216. There's a little bit of overlap or redundancy in 216, so some of the things are lumped together in sort of categories. But what we've put out there is all of the details, except for the last sentence, except for all the details that are in 216. The last sentence is something that we discussed at some length at the last subcommittee meeting. And the reason, there were actually 2 versions of this sentiment that was put forth at that meeting. And my notes were unclear. I went back and looked at the transcript of the meeting, and I think that was also unclear. So what I included here in red, the commission strives to work toward criminal justice, juvenile, and dependency systems that are anti-racist and anti-colonial. That was one of the 2 versions that came out of the meeting, and it was the more succinct version. So that's the one that I included here. And I believe that people have some comments on subsection B. So this would be a good time to raise those.
I have a comment.
Okay.
I've spent much of my adult professional life applying words to conduct.
Absolutely.
And so I looked at this. There are 2 words, or 4 words, I guess, but I don't fully understand. So let me start out by saying subsection 1 says we're going to follow the constitutions of Oregon, the United States, national standards. I absolutely agree with all of that. I have no idea what the word anti-colonial means and how it would apply to any situation we're talking about, which means at a specific time, I can see proposing something that somebody thinks is anti-colonial that's off my screen. I can't say the same thing about anti-racist because we should be anti-racist, but I think that whole concept is covered in paragraph A. So I don't know if there's another definition of anti-racist that the committee was trying to get to that is different from what our courts and our legislatures and our public policies have done.
So, okay.
Excuse me, that's.
So I think that opens up a discussion on that particular sentence, and I suspect other people may have things they want to say or add, either in addition or in response to Commissioner Sellers. So anyone else want to weigh in on that part of subsection B?
I can. I had actually similar thoughts. I mean, I know what anti-colonial is, but I don't know what it means in this context. And so my thought really is, if we want to describe how we're going to conduct business and what our values are, we should use verbs to describe that. We should be specific. What are we trying to achieve, rather than placing a name on something that people question what that is. And so I don't think it helps achieve the mission by saying we're going to strive to be something without describing what that thing actually is. And I also, along with that, think that if we are going to have a sentence like this in our bylaws, we should expand it. Because there are other groups of people that we are protecting, and we don't want to act in ways that also foster gender discrimination, discrimination based on all kinds of, any way that a person identifies themselves or is marginalized in any way. And so we need to be inclusive is really what I'm trying to say, if we're going to have something like this in here. That's my comment. Commissioner Harris.
So I was on this subcommittee and language similar to this or language like this was suggested. And frankly, I've actually read some of Professor Kennedy's works, the book, the anti-racist book, some of his essays. Just unfamiliar with less familiar with the anti-colonial term. Did some reading up on it since the last meeting. I think it's the same as decolonization, which there is a lot more information on that theory as well. It has been applied in some works to the justice system in some ways, and that was interesting. I tend to, that being said, and I don't disagree with the sentiment attached to this verbiage. I somewhat agree with Chair Nash on this. And one thing I discovered as I go to this, the state of Oregon is a diversity, equity, inclusion action plan under Governor Kate Brown, which was adopted 2 years ago. So it is pretty recent. It actually discusses the terms anti-racism and decolonization in its text. It is about 42 to 45 pages. It's very inclusive and comprehensive. I haven't studied it, I've read it. It seems to be along the lines of, I think, the sentiments of the subcommittee members. I think I can speak for them, all of them. But it does do a couple of things. I think if you were to edit this, amend this to say that the commission adopts the principles set forth in this particular doc, expands definitions, covers more people, is explicatory on these terms without just laying them out there and let people interpret their own terms their own ways. Because decolonization doesn't appear large. I mean, there is information about how it applies to the justice system. There's not as much information as how it applies to that versus the economy, for instance. But it's interesting stuff. And I think that I'm going to lay on the table here the idea that rather than putting some textual definition words that people may not be fully understanding or how they may apply to our mission, that we should consider either incorporating, adopting some or part or the emphasis or the substance of this State of Oregon Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Action Plan, Roadmap to Racial Equity and Belonging, as adopted. Well, I got the link to it. I can send it.
How accessible is that?
Accessible.
I mean, how easy is it for someone, a member of the public, to find it? If we refer to it in the bylaws and someone has no idea what we're talking about.
You hyperlink it. Yeah, the bylaws.
Hyperlink it in the bylaws,
Yeah,
for sure, we can do that.
Yeah, and I found it really easily when my Google's searching skills.
Excellent, so,
So can I just add from my perspective?
of course,
When you add language like that and you call it out, it's necessary for us to be doing that. But we might be thinking that as we're making rules or we're adopting policies, and that might be a conversation, but if we don't put it in our bylaws and call it out as this thing that we're focused on, like what you're saying, then it can slide to the side and not be the focus of what we're doing. Does that make sense? And we forget that we've made that commitment if we don't put it in writing somewhere. So I think that it's a both and. I personally, because I was talking to Eric here, there is no other DEI statement in any of the bylaws. There's like one mention in the next paragraph. So it might be best to just create a paragraph and say, these based on the governor's plan, because I read that too. And it's pretty encompassing. We could take some language there, just create a DEI type paragraph, but this is what's motivating us, right? Because I think the next one is to listen to the public and the people that have been impacted by the system, which is really what we're talking about here.
so as a suggestion, I think it's difficult to draft language in a session like this. what I'd like to propose is that there probably will have to be another governance subcommittee meeting between now and April. And that we can come up with some alternative language for the subcommittee to consider. And then the subcommittee could either bring back one suggestion or bring back two alternatives for the commission to consider at the April meeting if we end up discussing it there. Does that work for people? Is that a way to do it? Great.
Yes.
Okay, we definitely in section C, wanted to include more than the criminal justice system. So we've included criminal, juvenile, and dependency systems. And that language is continued throughout whenever we mention to the systems in general. We've left out other things that we are in charge of, like habeas corpus, post-conviction, mental health, civil commitment, rather. We can certainly add all of those things individually. Arguably, habeas might sort of be covered by the criminal system, but civil commitment isn't. And so I would consider a friendly amendment to add in civil commitment. Do people think that's appropriate? Okay, well.
Can you just define what you mean by civil commitment?
Well, so when the state wants to send someone to the state mental hospital against that person's will, and that's not the direct result of a hearing to determine if they're competent to stand trial or something similar to that. They have to go through a process where a judge determines whether a burden of persuasion is met. To see that that person meets the criteria, the statutory criteria for being involuntarily committed.
Whether they're a danger to themselves or others.
And we provide attorneys for those allegedly mentally ill people.
Right, I mean, I guess my brain is kind of clicking around the most recently passed piece of legislation, House Bill 4002, and like, what are the wrinkles that are gonna pop to the surface that the agency and public defense providers are gonna have to respond to, that may potentially put them in a precarious kind of situation, if that makes sense. I don't think we can encompass that in our bylaws per se, but I think it is a conversation as this policy is implemented that, you know, we're gonna have to be clear about the implications.
So it's certainly something we're gonna have to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everybody in agreement with adding civil commitment to that list?
Yeah, especially because if you get a public defense contract, civil commitments is typically one of the types of cases that you are responsible for.
Along those lines, I have a question about whether or not it makes sense to list all of the case types in your bylaws. And so to Jennifer's point, the legislature may pass laws that create new responsibilities or change the responsibilities. Are we gonna want to revisit our bylaws every time that happens? For example, a few sessions ago, the legislature tasked then OPD or PDSC with overseeing guardianships. Thank you. And so we have a contract with provider that does guardianship hearings. That is a statutory mandate, but that could change in a future legislative session, as could a number of our statutory mandates that are not constitutional.
Pre-filing representation.
You couldn't just say justice system, a justice system.
We could say the commission strives to work toward justice in all of the areas the commission is tasked with overseeing by the legislature. I mean, that's not elegant, but categorically refer to everything that we task doing, because certainly we do want to strive toward justice in all of those areas. Would that be a good avoiding amendment solution?
So I like that, and you could say, to achieve this mission, the commission executive director consider the perspectives of public defense providers, people with lived experience in the justice system, and anyone or any other populations receiving services from the agency. And then you're covering anyone now or if they change in the future.
Okay, so again, this is, as I said before, we're probably not gonna vote on this today, so we'll take this back to the subcommittee and come up with adequate language. Does that work for everybody? Yeah, all right, moving on to 4. The three definitions that are here in 4 are for terms that are used throughout the document. There are a couple of other terms that are defined closer to where they're actually used. And so these are consequently just basic definitions. For example, emergency is defined in the context of emergency meeting later on in the document.
If I would look at this oversight.
Oversight is not defined.
So, I know that there are more restrictions on our contact with staff, for example, if it's in an oversight capacity, but I just wonder if there could be more clarity about what oversight means.
Great, we'll come up with clarity for oversight.
Could someone just explain to me? I'm sorry that I don't fully understand that. But
What we were
so
trying,
apparently I can't talk to staff without the executive director's approval. I'm not fighting that, of course, but when it's with respect to oversight, and could someone just explain what that?
yes, the distinction we were getting at is that some people who are non-voting members of the commission have contracts with OPDC, and they will have to talk to staff about their business relations, not their commission relations. So we use the word oversight to refer to commission business. So for example, if Jasmine needs to talk about,
So my analyst is Megan Doak. So about, for instance, if I'm talking to her about what's going on with my contract, I need to be able to talk to Megan about what's going on with my contract without it looking like I'm meddling into commission business. As opposed to if I'm talking to Jessica about what's going on with commission business, that we need to differentiate which hat I'm wearing.
And I would just clarify, so there may be just pre-existing social relationships that commissioners have with people who work at the agency that wouldn't, Director Camp, it wouldn't be about agency business, so like that's there.
If there's any way to clarify that oversight, then.
great suggestion, we will work on that
Thank
as
you.
well.
I have kind of a preliminary, broad question, and that is, should we not, have these bylaws only effective to December 31st, 2024? Because when we transfer to the executive branch, we no longer appoint the executive director, we no longer, a lot of this is going to have to change anyway, so shouldn't we sunset it in the document?
We're trying to avoid having to do this again next year.
Well, we're going to have to, because this won't apply.
Well, this won't apply unless we change the wording. So in other parts of it where we were thinking about how it changes in 2025, we tried to avoid that problem. So my personal preference, and obviously it's just me, would be to reword the definition of executive director so that it doesn't say selected by the commission, but instead is wording that encompasses the change, and then we don't have to amend it again.
We'll also have to do that for voting. Yeah, we'll have to do that in the section where we're more detailed about 2/3 vote, et cetera, but that's, I think that would work too, just as long as.
Unless people are wanting to go over this all again a year from now, we could certainly sunset it and have to do this again.
I know we did try to make as many language decisions that we could so that they would carry over from this year to next year. Direct people to apply to the applicable statute, but not have to make as many changes. Having said that, there's likely, I mean, there's a reason I was hoping that the governance subcommittee could be a standing subcommittee to address things like this as they come up. And, you know, we do need to make some changes next year. I don't think it'd be terribly challenging to do those cleanups, and get them back in front of the commission as we move into the executive branch, so.
Let's see what we can come up with here and in other places, but thank you for drawing that to our attention. Anything else on Article 1? Okay, Article 2, which deals with membership. So again, here in subsection 1, this is one of the places where we didn't spell it out. Instead, we referred to the statute because that changes in 2025. In terms of who defines membership and so on and so forth. Same as in subsection 4, termination, again, just referring to the statute as opposed to spelling out the procedures. I have nothing else till we get to subsection 7, but if anybody else does, please raise it. Okay, subsection 7. I don't have anything until we get to sub D. And we, this is relatively broad, support the chair in furtherance of their responsibilities as requested. I think at least some of us were anticipating that given the amount of work that is piled on the chair, it might at some point be a good idea for the chair to be able to delegate some of that work to someone else, like the vice chair. And assuming that there might have to be a change in chairmanship at some point, that might make it easier to find someone who's willing to be the chair if that ability to delegate were authorized in the bylaws. So that language is meant to be able to allow the chair some flexibility to share some of the workload. So interested to know how people feel about that. I see Chair Nash nodding.
I like it.
Okay, I have nothing else in, until we get to subsection 9. As we have mentioned several times already today, we are in 9A, we are anticipating further guidance from the Justice Department through Mr. Dietrich on how we can talk to each other. So again, we're just referring to the chapter because we are all hopeful that some members of the legislature will amend that statute so that it can be clear how we communicate with each other effectively. In subsection 9C, again, when acting in an oversight capacity, we'll do something to define oversight. Where we say that the executive director shall communicate authorization in writing, again, we put that in there to, first of all, make it clear that commission members shouldn't just willy-nilly call up staff, but second of all, to protect staff. I mean, there's not much that anybody can do to us if we violate that rule, but staff could get in trouble if they go along with it. So this is protection for staff. Any comments about that?
It protects the director too, because the director can know what communication is happening.
Absolutely, the director can know what communications are happening. Good point.
Do we want to put something, I asked, with trepidation, do we want to put something in there that says that nothing in this section is designed to protect any kind of whistleblowing, anything? I mean, I should just say, I don't think that's an issue, but we don't want, I think we want to be careful about making it look like we're trying to stifle communication if there's a legitimate complaint,
Can I hear some discussion on that?
maybe the general counsel.
Isn't whistleblowing already covered in statute? The bylaws can't get over that.
Right, but I wondered if we, and if the answer is no, that's fine, but I wondered if we wanted to explicitly acknowledge that. Because we're talking about communication.
So you want staff to feel comfortable to come to a commission member in a whistleblowing capacity?
No, I mean, sorry. I don't want to, I want it to be clear, we're not trying to prevent that, is what I'm saying. If, I mean, that's all I'm saying. No, I don't really.
Chair Nash, I think a statement from the chair of the commission that that's not the intent here is probably sufficient, and I agree with Commissioner Buckley that the bylaws can't contradict those statutes, so the statute would win.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
I read this differently than you said it.
Okay,
I read it to mean the executive director would send an email to the commission member and say you can talk, rather than giving permission to the OPDC employee to talk.
shall communicate such authorization in writing to the staff member and the commission member. How's that? So everybody knows that they've got permission. That work?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
Do we want it to say the executive director or her designee? I wouldn't have delegated those authorities.
Is everybody comfortable with adding or her designee?
Yes.
Okay. Let me add that here.
Business on vacation.
And I'm just going to say or designee. I don't want you ever to leave, but you might at some point. And the replacement might not use her as a pronoun.
Or she may be on business or vacation.
Or whatever, yeah. Okay, I think that's all I have for Article 1. Does anyone else have anything for Article 1? I mean, Article 2, sorry, yeah, that was Article 3. All right, moving on to Article 3. In 3A1, basically, this just spells out what's in 151.216 as it applies to the commission members. And the subcommittee thought it was important to list these things out there so that it would be there in relatively plain language in an easily accessible place so that neither commission members nor the executive director nor the staff would have to go searching for statutes to find out what the lines of authority were. And as I said, one of the goals that we had in mind with these bylaws was to correct problems from the past and anticipate problems in the future. And numbers of us have heard from a variety of sources that one of the problems in the past was a lack of clarity about whose job was what and blurring lines and people not staying in their lanes. So spelling it out here was considered to be a good idea by the subcommittee. I have nothing else till we get down to subsection 5. If anybody does, please speak up. Subsection 1A5.
Oh, 1A5.
Little 5. So attendance at meetings, as it says, attendance at meetings is very important for quorum purposes. Knowing as far ahead as possible who's going to be here is super important so that we know that we can have a meeting at which there's a quorum. And so, we have informed the executive director and the chair as soon as practicable of an inability to attend. That kind of information isn't covered by public meetings laws, so that can be done. The reason we put in the second sentence, and we did this at the last meeting, the chair shall indicate either before or after the relevant meeting, whether the absence is excused or not excused, and may provide input on absences to the appointing authority. Starting in 2025, commission members who are appointed by the governor can be removed by the governor. And failure to attend meetings is one of the bases for possible removal. On the other hand, the commission or the director can't tell the governor who to remove, right? But certainly could provide input, so this allows that to happen. There's currently no statutory requirement that somebody can get removed for not attending meetings. And we talked about whether we should add something in the bylaws to be applicable in 2024 or starting in 2025 for commission members who were appointed by the Chief Justice as opposed to appointed by the governor, because the statute says commission members appointed by the governor can be removed for cause. So we didn't come up with an answer to that. And this would be a good time to hear other people's point of view on whether there should be some kind of attendance requirement with some kind of consequences, including making recommendations to the Chief Justice.
We haven't heard, but my only concern about this is what you raised earlier. The concept that we now have a meeting every single month. And the possibility that we may have more than meetings every single month. So I have my calendar filled out for every planned meeting. And I'm trying to plan my leisurely days otherwise. And it gets difficult for me to say that somebody can come up with a meeting, even with a month's notice. And I say instead, I'm going to go to someplace. And they say that's unexcused. That's my only concern.
It's a huge concern. I think it's a huge concern for everybody. And starting in 2025 for commission members who the governor appoints, there's a good cause requirement. And so the way it's stated right now, with the chair shall indicate, just for our own internal purposes, whether the absence is excused or not excused, this puts the burden on the chair to decide whether somebody's excuse is good or not. I don't know if the chair wants that burden. But
Well, I mean, so the way I read this, I mean, I realize it says that, and my thought is we're all adults. And then, you know, if you can't come to a meeting because you want to go to on vacation, that's excused. You can't come to a meeting because you don't feel well. That basically everything's excused because we're all adults and we're here and we're committed. I committed to doing the work. I imagine an unexcused absence to be someone who stops coming and doesn't communicate, which is, I think, exactly what this sentence is designed to address, because this happened in another agency where the executive director, commission, where the chair of the commission just left and moved away and didn't communicate with anyone, because there was no way to remove them, there was no way to. So I see this as, that would be an unexcused absence situation, which then the chair would communicate with the appointing authority, the Chief Justice or the governor, and say, hey, by the way, this person has been gone for the last 6 meetings, we can't find them, we don't know where they are, we haven't excused their absence, you get to decide what to do.
And that makes sense, but I think what you're saying is different.
Right.
Because that's not what these words say.
Right, understood.
so happy to have suggestions for taking it out, amending it. We thought since we're talking about authority and outlining authority, that some authority should be given to the chair to deal with absences. But if nobody else, if there's not a consensus on having that in there, it shouldn't be there. Tom, did you have your hand?
Thanks again for all the work you've done, Commissioner Vandenberg. I just wanted to make sure I understood. Absence doesn't mean failure to attend an in-person meeting. The reason I ask is that because the June meeting was moved, I can no longer attend in person, but I'll Zoom in. Am I correct that absence is for complete absence, not remote?
That was my sense. Yeah. Yeah. Well, sorry about that.
I didn't know that with my role at work and my schedule, some of the meetings I just can't attend. I've let Mona know when that's the case. I'll even let Chair Nash know when that's the case. Sometimes, most of the times, with advance notice, like this retreat, I'm able to communicate with my employer and get the time, but some of the monthly meetings and some of the pop-up meetings, it's really difficult for me to be at all of them because of my role and my schedule at work. And so I don't want anyone to think that I'm not committed to the commission. It's just that when I saw this, I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
So.
Yeah. So let me suggest, I was just hearing what you said, Commissioner Harvey. What if we took out the language that's right there now? And we said something like, in the situation of repeated absences with lack of communication, the chair is authorized to communicate with the appointing authority.
Much better.
All right, everybody like that? Let me write it down.
And the statutory language about the report to the governor's office is more restrictive than that. So it says 2 absences, the commission administrator shall report to the governor. So it is, when we go to the executive branch, the statutory language will be more restrictive than the bylaws language. I think when we were talking about this initially, this was also seen a little bit as a way for the chair to communicate to the governor. Yes, there have been the 2 absences, which we shall communicate. However, I've excused those absences, and that could be something that the governor would potentially consider in making a decision about whether or not to remove that board member. And we wanted to be able to create a board that has diverse points of view and understanding that this is a volunteer board, and a lot of the people that we may want to get to serve on the board will have conflicts with their work schedules and other conflicts that arise, that they would be able to lean on the chair to say this is an excused absence, which might help mitigate that in the eyes of the appointing authority.
And so keep the language that says, and may provide input on absences to the appointing authority.
Actually, I think we should put the statutory language in there that says 2 absences, however, however, the chair shall indicate to the appointing authority whether the absence, or whatever the language you want to put that, it has, whether the chair has excused or whatever, or not excused. And we can, if we want to talk about what kinds of absences would be excused, we can do that, but I think that makes sense in the context that Director Campy's talking about. It makes sense to give the chair some discretion to excuse or not excuse and explain that.
All right, I've got so far what we're wordsmithing here. This is something else we'll take back to the subcommittee and try to come up with something that captures the feeling. If people have more thoughts about language, please send them. You can ask Eric whether you can send them to me directly. Send them to Eric. But if you have thoughts about the language, we're just a subcommittee, so we'd like to hear any ideas that people have. Anything else on this absence issue?
Well, speaking of absence, I have to leave for work.
I've already excused it.
Chair Nash and, Susan, just, yeah, I'm reading the language now, and it talks about shall forfeit office unless the member is prevented from attending by serious illness of a member or the family of the member, or for any cause that in the judgment of the governor constitutes valid reason.
Yeah, so it's not the chair's discretion, it's the governor's discretion, yeah.
But I think we wanted.
But the valid reason, I think, would go to excused or unexcused and what the reason
I
was.
think it depends on the governor.
Well, sure,
Well,
I don't find any honesty to the executive branch, but that ship has sailed.
All right. Anything else on the absence issue? Okay, so then going down to subsection B, the first thing I have, here is that 3 is something else, that only is valid in 2024. The power to appoint is removed beginning in 2025. Removed, the power to hire an executive director is removed from the commission in 2025. And so one way to deal with this is to just remove subsection 3 entirely. Since what's in subsection 3 now is only valid this year. We didn't come up with a solution for how to deal
Why don't
with
we just put it before appoint until January 1st, 2025?
And then the
leave.
commission gets the authority back.
Right.
There's a period of time when the authority goes to the
governor, and that comes back in 27, I think it is, yeah.
So we could, unless, until,
As provided
just
by
put it
law.
right.
Shall appoint by 2/3 as provided.
As provided by law, okay, let's just do that, because then we don't have to amend it, okay? Okay, then in the last meeting, we added a new subsection 4. It occurred to those of us who'd been on boards before, that one thing that a board does is set, expectations and set performance reviews. And we thought it was important for the commission to be able to do that with regards to the executive director. The reason we set it as semi-annual, is because it's a 2-year term, 4-year term, so it would be halfway through the.
Biannual, semi-annual, 6 months.
Biannual, sorry,
Yeah,
okay, we'll change it to biannual.
I was thinking we were gonna set expectations every 6 months with review every 2 years. I thought, that's a lot.
Biannual, thank you. And the reason we, set the performance review in September was because, we approved the budget in July. And, once we know what's in the budget, we can use the budget as a basis for setting the performance expectations. So that was the reason for that, schedule in subsection 4. So any other comments or corrections in subsection 4?
And just to clarify, there's a difference between us approving a budget and the legislature approving a budget. So, do we want to wait until the legislature approves the budget so we actually know what resources we have to work with? Rather than what our aspirational budget is?
Great question.
And in fact, that is the July is, we'll get the legislatively approved budget in July,
Right.
and then
In the odd years.
in the odd years, yeah, because it's every other year that you do the performance review. So you would have the budget in July and then set expectations for the director and then do that review work and stuff.
Okay, that's right.
The review of the expectations, so would you want then the review to be in the even years? a year after the expectations are set.
Do you wanna put that in the bylaws or just have that be the practice?
The practice, everything.
Any thoughts on that?
My recollection was that we were talking about doing the review the same year as the budget, right? We get through the budget and then move into the, so it may be worth just saying the odd number years.
In the
So-
odd number
If if you set the expectations after the budget, there's nothing to review the performance on in a month. So if the budget's in July, set the expectations in August, you don't wanna do a review in September, you wanna do a review the following September of the priorities or the performance measures that you set.
So the
I think we wanna
Expectations.
put when,
are set in the odd number years and the performance review is set in the even numbered years.
and I think we should spell that
Okay,
out, so that in the future, there's a schedule that's set,
Got it.
that other people who are commissioners can get.
All right. Excellent. The next thing I have in Article 3 is, in 2A. Executive director is the chief executive officer, et cetera. The last line in that, the subcommittee added, the last line is the executive director shall ensure the agency carries out the policy directives established by the commission. Again, this was something that the subcommittee added in to make sure that the lines of authority were clearly spelled out. Any comments on that? Okay, subsection 4, meetings. This was one that got a lot of attention at the subcommittee. We divided meetings into 3 types: regular meetings, special meetings, and emergency meetings. And we thought it was important to distinguish among different kinds of meetings because they would have a different cadence. We defined emergencies specifically for the purpose of emergency meeting. Before I get down there, under special meetings, we added, these may include special meetings dedicated to gathering input from members of the public, including those with lived experience, et cetera. The subcommittee thought it would be important to give us the authority to meet with groups of members of the public, persons with lived experience other than our one board member with lived experience, and also people from communities that have been impacted in one way or another by the criminal justice system, to get input from these folks directly, rather than to have it filtered through staff or filtered through providers or filtered through other stakeholders. And so how we end up doing that, how often we end up doing that, obviously that's not something to be put in the bylaws, I don't think. But we thought it was very important to have the authority to do that, so that's why that's in there. Obviously, the language about criminal juvenile dependency systems, that will get changed the way we talked about changing it at the beginning, so that'll be in there. Any issues about subsection 2?
I think it's great.
Subsection 3, we defined emergency. This was based loosely on the definition of emergency in the Idaho Commission materials that Eric made available to us. And we included the likelihood of severity of injury or damage to persons or property, especially now that we're going to be having state trial level public defender offices. there's gonna be more real estate than just the OPDC office that we're responsible for in some way. And so, certainly things can happen to persons and property in those offices. So, so that's why, that's in there for emergency meetings. We wanted to have a relatively flexible, but not all over the map definition of emergency. So, yeah.
So I like it substantively, I just caught a couple errors, and it's remarkable how there have been no errors up to this point, but
Oh, my gosh.
in 3A, I think increase needs to be increases.
Increases, excellent.
And then in 3D, conduct needs to be conducted.
And which one are you in now?
3D, so just a few short paragraphs later.
Okay,
The emergency meeting shall be conducted.
you're a better editor than word editing.
No, it's remarkable how few errors there are. It's a really well written document.
So the next thing that was a big issue was timetables. In terms of when agendas get posted, when materials get posted, and so we sort of have to look through this carefully, but here's the timetable that I believe this sets out. So for regular meetings, we have members being able to request an agenda item 10 business days prior to the meeting. The agenda would then get published to members and the public 1 week prior to the meeting. So that would give members a chance to add things to the agenda before it gets published. The last edition of an action item is also 1 week before the meeting. But the agenda can be amended with non-action items up until the start of the meeting, is what we have here. Then as for materials, action items need to be made available a week prior to the meeting, absent good cause. Other materials also need to be provided a week prior to the meeting, absent good cause. And although certainly action items and other items are different, we've heard a lot from commission members that people really need time to read these materials. And we would like, at least the subcommittee, would like staff to try to beat these schedules to give us time. This stuff is complicated and we all have other things that we do in our lives. So for special meetings, these are the ones that are called non-emergency, but different. Right now, we have the notice, the agenda, and the materials at least 24 hours prior to the meeting. Now, that obviously could be changed if people want more time. For emergency meetings, these can come up very quickly, and so notice, agenda, and materials as early as practicable is what's in there. So I can tell you which subsections each one of those things is in, but putting it all together, that is the timetable that these bylaws set right now.
So is the intention not to have any action items at a special meeting?
It does not break out action items separately for a special meeting, so everything in a special meeting is right now at least 24 hours prior, as I understand it.
So I think that conflicts with 7B.
I think it does too.
So if the intention is no action items in a special meeting, which I don't think we want, because maybe we do want action items, then I think that we should amend the special meeting rule to be, well, whatever, just make it consistent and to give as much time as possible. And I can't, as a practical matter, of seeing calling a special meeting with less than 7 days notice anyway. Because the kind of logistics that would be needed to put that kind of a thing together would be more than that. So I don't think as a practical matter, it's gonna be.
So I agree with you, this isn't coherent.
I didn't say that.
Well, I'm willing to say it. So what kinds of cadence do people want for special meetings? So right now, special meetings,
Well, let's ask the executive director how much time
Yeah.
she would need.
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying with regard to the action items and not wanting to exclude that possibility. When I look at the purpose of the special meetings, they tend to be more information gathering for the commission. So it's not clear to me what type of action items you would want prepared by the agency in order to facilitate a special meeting.
I'll take that as a friendly suggestion of what we were really thinking about.
So. is there
Well,
someone
I was just to say that, but also, okay, different topic regarding regular meetings, so table that, go ahead.
So, I mean, it seems to me that they're talking about when would you need action be taken outside of the regular meetings? And looking at the two contexts there, it seems like that would be an emergency meeting.
Yeah.
The special meetings, and the special meetings are basically more informational gathering, I guess, or, you know, I'm kind of looking at that, not understanding exactly. It may be building off of something that happened at a regular meeting, something like that.
Well, I think it may include some of the things that our strategic planning people were talking about, because the regular meetings are ones that are set according to a regular schedule established at the first meeting of each calendar year.
Right.
So that would be our monthly meetings.
Right.
So special meetings would be any kind of non-emergency meeting that would happen in between that. For example, some of the things that the strategic planning people were talking about. And I guess those could include action items.
Well, either-
See, I was just gonna say, Chair Nash, they use this term special meeting throughout the public meeting, the public records advisory manual from DOJ, but it's not really defined as to what it means. Like, we know what an emergency meeting is, we know what a regular meeting is. It's not clear to me from the DOJ manual or statute what a special meeting is. Like, for example, the meeting we're talking about having in April, we didn't plan that one at the beginning of the
Well,
year.
that's what I was going to say, that was the thing I was gonna table, is maybe we amend number 1 then, regular meetings, to say, according to a regular schedule, established at the first meeting of each calendar year and adjusted as necessary throughout the year or something, so that we have the ability to add in other meetings, otherwise they don't fit into any of these categories.
If it is just a meeting that gets added after the first of the year as a special meeting, then I would think the same timelines for action items would apply to it as regular meetings.
Excuse me, I would agree with that, and therefore, I think the timing issue with the cadence is, Chairman.
So if that's true, we don't need to have a paragraph on special meetings. If we were to amend it, as Chair Nash suggests, and add, what's your language again?
Just, established at the first meeting of the year and adjusted as necessary throughout the year. But I do like leaving the special meetings in, because we used to do, none of us were on the commission then or worked for the agency, but there used to be special meetings where the commission would travel around in different places and do a service, gather information about the service deliveries, gather, where they weren't really, they were more information.
What if we called this informational meetings instead of special meetings?
I kind of like it being defined that way too, or whether it's vice versa, special meetings or informational gathering or listening sessions or something like that. I agree with what Senator Brzezinski said and what Chair Nash just said, that there is a type of meeting the commission has engaged in the past. And the governance subcommittee, it clearly came up, they wanted to do some of that work again going forward, where instead of approving agency policy, they were hearing from people and gathering information.
It is because you say that this term special meeting is used in other manuals. I personally, I think would be more comfortable calling these informational meetings.
Okay.
And that way it's clear that we're not talking about action items. Does that work for everybody?
I think that's fine. I think under the emergency meeting section, you might want to put something in there that subsection 7 timelines do not apply to that. Maybe instead we're doing something else, maybe 24 hours notice or whatever it would be, but make it clear that subsection 7 timelines do not apply to the emergency, just the regular information.
That's good.
And then I think you need Chair Nash's language for the regular meetings that creates some flexibility
I
to
have it.
pre-schedule. Okay.
I wrote it in. Obviously, this will all get circulated again. All right, so, 7, so now we're, see, emergency meeting.
Oh, actually, can we bump up to 6?
Yeah.
The quorum?
Yeah.
Here's that pesky little question again about if the commission loses a quorum, the meeting shall adjourn. Okay, what does that mean? Mr. Dietrich.
I think it means that when this group gets together, when a quorum gets together, by definition, it's a public meeting, and because we're required to now, we're showing all of these meetings virtually, as required by statute, so the public can watch, but once we fail to have a quorum, the meeting legally can't exist, so I think
The public meeting, you mean?
the public meeting can't exist anymore, and so I think we need to adjourn once we lose a quorum, whether temporarily, because we know someone's coming back in a little bit of time, but
So you and I have had discussions before about this, and if I recall our discussion, it was, we can't have a public meeting anymore, we're not involved in a public meeting. But does that mean that we can't continue, that we shouldn't continue, or no, that we cannot continue to have a discussion about issues? And should we not continue to have that discussion about issues in public, even though it's not technically a public meeting? So tell me about how you feel about that.
well, it's, what is it?
Well, with housing, we
That's-
had the same issue, right? We continued the meeting, I can tell you that, and what we did was we front loaded decisions, or if folks were gonna be late, we would,
Sure, I'm not talking about the practical, I'm talking about when it
Yeah.
happened, what we need to do.
and they kept it public, I mean, at least housing, I know they did that, they did not cancel a meeting.
So I
Yes,
think we need to specifically address it in the bylaws. I think we should say, if the commission loses a quorum during the meeting, the public meeting shall adjourn, however. And then we can say,
What's after the however?
Yeah.
well,
I
then
mean, you
we,
might leave to go to the restroom, and you now know, I mean, I'm not a voting member, but if a voting member walks out of the room, and you no longer have a quorum because they stepped outside, and they got their cell phone turned on, or whatever, does that mean we stop right then because you don't have a quorum?
well, that's what I'm saying, is I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's why I think we need to have a continuation of the paragraph that says, that we can continue to discuss that, and we're going to do it in whatever obviously you can put this in legal terms, but we're going to continue our discussions, and they're going to be in public. Because I think that's the issue, and that's why I'm looking at Mr. Dietrich, like, can we do that, and what should we do, what's the legal?
In the legislative process, if you don't have a quorum, you can't take a vote.
Can't take a vote.
So you can still, the informational hearing can still continue, the public meeting still continues.
Yeah, we don't wanna mix up the branches, but in the legislative branch, I'll start meetings when I don't have a quorum as an informational meeting and waiting for my quorum to appear.
Right.
And then we go into a public hearing.
So instead of using the word public twice, because that would be confusing, the public meeting shall adjourn. However, the discussion will continue and will be broadcasted or will be,
Well, maybe we don't even
Open
need to
to
put
not-
that in there. Maybe we just say the public meeting shall adjourn and no matter may be brought before the body for an action item. No vote may be taken for an action item.
The public meeting adjourns, it means that it gets cut off.
Yeah,
The
that's the
public can't
problem.
listen to the information. So why does the public meeting have to end without a
We
quorum?
just, I think it's action, you just cannot take action without having
Okay.
a form before.
It's
Whatever the,
Senator Brzezowski and, Commissioner Buckley, it is, like, I looked at the legislative bylaw, the rules, because I remember specifically working with you and having non-quorums take public testimony, you know, it was, and I was trying to figure out what the difference was, but I think the one difference is this commission is rarely taking testimony from the public in the same way that a legislative committee is. Normally, it's
Public input.
it's communicating, deliberating with staff, and so it's just a little bit of a different dynamic. I agree with you, like, if someone's using the restroom, like, it seems weird to stop the meeting to me, or you're stepping out for a second. The issue that's come up in the past is when we lose people over time, and we know they're not coming back, and we're down to like 3 people, and we're continuing the meeting, and
Well, that issue dissolved the last commission, let's be honest. Not the last one, but the one before that. That was one of the governing issues that occurred that made a huge problem. So
How
we
about
should
this?
address it somehow.
How about, if the commission loses a quorum during a meeting, something like the chair will have the discretion to continue the discussion, but not to call for a vote, something like that.
I'm
No action,
asking what we can and can't do. Because, I mean, the other part that we haven't talked about is the language in the statute that says that we can't receive information for consideration.
Right.
Or deliberate, we can't deliberate without a quorum.
So what's the difference between deliberating and discussing?
Deliberating to me is like a work session, and that's between the commissioners are talking. The others, you're potentially getting information in, or you're giving information out. No, it's,
The definition of public meeting, I believe, includes quorum in it. So I think by definition, if you don't have a quorum, you don't have a public meeting of something else. You might have a work session, like the public meeting ends, but the commission could continue as a work session. But I believe that the definition of public meeting includes a quorum.
So
A meeting means the convening of a governing body, of a public body, for which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or to deliberate toward a decision
right,
on any matter. That's what the statute says.
And so if you're gathering information as you would, you know, like you're talking about in a listening session, you're not really deliberating at that point, we're just gathering the information.
for me, hearing that is pretty much what Peter and I worked through in the legislature. You can continue to take information in, you can give it out, but you can't deliberate toward a final decision. And you can't take a vote for a final decision without having that quorum.
So how about
Briefings,
saying
but
if
not
the
action.
commission loses a quorum, the chair will have the discretion to continue to receive information and have a general discussion, something like
I
that.
think we're micromanaging the language here.
Okay.
I don't think we need to go into that detail, because someone potentially is gonna call it and saying that we've overstepped or whatever. I mean, and to me, the rule is, or the law is the law. You cannot vote on an action item without having a quorum. You can't deliberate in a way to process to reach a conclusion or to take a vote without a quorum. So the chair shouldn't have that authority. What the chair should be doing is managing the meeting and making certain those things don't happen. But the meeting itself continues.
So I think that if you're a non-lawyer, non-inside baseball, as I say it, looking at number 6, and you just read it, a quorum of the commission is required to conduct a meeting. If the commission loses a quorum during the meeting shall adjourn. To me, that means everybody has to stop doing what they're doing and you have to leave.
Yeah, so we'll take
So I think what we should say is a quorum of the commission is required to conduct a public meeting.
Yeah.
Because that's language. And if the commission loses a quorum during a public meeting, then public meeting shall, whatever, or just take the last sentence out of
I
the way.
would push back because I think when you have the same problem, I think what it basically is, that you cannot take an act, you can't vote on an action item. And you can't deliberate to reach consensus toward voting on an action, and that's what the chair, he, she, or they need to be observing. How many people do I have here in the committee, that are voting members, when we reach a point of where if you start going into deliberation, you don't have it. Yeah, wait, we don't have our quorum, so we can't deliberate.
Maybe we just take 6 out, because we have 5 that said we have to comply with public meeting laws. Which,
What if we say, a quorum of the commission is required to decide an action item or to deliberate toward making a decision?
I think that's great.
that's, yeah,
I think that's right, because it's still a public meeting, it just
Yeah.
means we don't have a quorum.
Right, right.
It just means we can't deliberate more.
I mean, yeah, this can really be used multiple ways. I mean, you can have a very top contentious public meeting going on.
that's
And
true.
this one walks out to deny the quorum,
Yeah,
and all of a sudden you're telling me.
You've had experience with that.
I've been in the minority.
Who would do that? Well, let me put that in, I think I've got it, and again, people can think about this some more and do whatever we need to do. How are we doing on time?
It is 3:31. So we have, if people want to take a break, we can take a break. I was thinking we could probably just power through. But you tell me, we've got another hour, about 45 minutes.
I'm happy to power through if everybody else is. I'm finding this extremely useful.
I was gonna say exciting.
I took that for granted. Okay, 7, we've talked about agendas, items, all that stuff. Conduct of meetings, let's say, so 7D. This was put in there to avoid the problem that we had in January with the document that was full of technical language and acronyms. And I think everybody's understanding that that's a problem from what I heard earlier. So it's just in there to be sure that everybody keeps that in mind.
I'm sorry, where are you?
Subsection D,
Oh,
OPDC
D,
staff
gotcha.
shall prepare meeting materials in plain English. Technical language shall be defined and clarified for ease of access to non-technical readers. All acronyms shall be explained in full.
And just to clarify, there may be times where our audience, like maybe it's the legislature, where we have to use technical language, but in the one pager where we, explain to the commission is when we'll make sure that we comply with this.
Well, and technical language can be defined.
Yeah.
Even if you have to use it. Conduct of meetings, a big issue that we've discussed for quite a while was whether, how to deal with Zoom meetings. So the 2 issues with Zoom meetings, so we're in B now, 8B. 2 issues in Zoom meetings is, do you have your name showing on your little picture? Or do you have to have your camera on? And so we're back to thinking about quorums. If someone doesn't have their camera on, you don't know whether they're really there or not. They could just have their little face, their little name up. And on the other hand, if we're having 4-hour meetings, sometimes you might want to turn your camera on to blow your nose or whatever it is you need to do. And so Eric consulted with the Justice Department. My understanding of what he found out, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they said it's the best practice always to have your camera on, but it's not required. But it really is needed if we're taking a vote, because you absolutely have to know that there's a quorum present to take a vote. So what we did here was compromise. Commission members shall have their names posted and to the extent practicable, their cameras on. And then all voting members shall have cameras on during the vote.
Perfect.
We wanted staff to have their names posted so we knew who was there. And, but since staff is likely to be doing other work during the meeting, we thought it was fine for them to have their cameras off, so that's what we have in there.
Yeah, I think the other thing you'd want to consider in here, and this is something we try to do in the legislature, at least I do as a chair, that is to have voice votes on each of these, so you actually call the name of the person and they give a vote, and that's compared to just having people raise their hand even if it's on Zoom.
We did it toward the last couple of meetings, just have that voice vote and it was helpful.
I think we have that in here under voting, but maybe not, let's go see, that's in subsection 11. Unless any voting member of the commission requests a vote of roll call voice, the chair shall ask if any of the voting members of the commission object. If no objections are made, the motion will pass. If any member of the OPDC objects to the motion, a roll call vote will be held.
I think that's appropriate when you're in a in-person meeting. I just think that you want to establish a rule for when it's not in person, that it's a mandate, because there could be someone that has technical difficulty while they're on
Good point.
and may not actually know a vote actually occurring.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
that's an
That I
excellent
didn't even
point.
think about.
Yeah, so, we will amend 11B to require a roll call vote all the time.
For video.
In video,
Yeah.
yeah, Zoom meetings,
Anyone appearing on video? Do we have hybrid meetings here too?
yeah,
No, true.
We're doing it.
okay, that's a really good point, none of us thought about it. So one of the things that we, so before we get there, going back to 8E. So 8E deals with accommodations. There's an Oregon statute on accommodations that deals with, interpreters for people who have hearing issues. We, think that the issue of accommodations, including interpreters, should also cover interpreters for people who do not speak fluent English and need an interpretation with other languages. And at our last meeting, Jesse, I think, talked about the fact that the staff is already coming up with protocols to deal with language interpretation for non-English speakers. We didn't want to put anything too specific in here because we don't want to put pressure on the staff to have to come up with something before they have figured out the right way to do it.
And we might wanna look to the state requirements for ADA and accessibility, 'cause I think that this is gonna actually be broader than language. If somebody had needed wheelchair access, for example, to a meeting here, we would want with notice to be able to provide.
Well, for sure, reasonable accommodations would
reasonable
cover, I
accommodation.
think, all of that. So that this is not limited to language.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion was looking at what the state does related to public meetings and just using that language. Cause I think it does speak to all of that. This is what I did at DHS, but, these are standards across every agency, so that we can just pull and adopt, it's not, I'm currently working on getting that language and making sure it applies to us, but, it's pretty standard.
So, one of the things that we discussed at some length in our meeting was, whether we need to use the title commissioner and last name when we're addressing each other at meetings. And in our subcommittee meeting, we just used first names. Everybody seemed very comfortable with that. I noticed in this meeting, we could go back and forth, sometimes saying commissioner and sometimes using first names. There are a number of reasons we discussed why not using the term commissioner when we're addressing each other, as opposed to maybe referring to what somebody else said. It sets up a hierarchy. It sets up this notion, especially if we're dealing with members of the public that we're somehow more knowledgeable or, better in some way. It, can be very intimidating to people who are not themselves professionals or don't have a lot of experience in this area of action. And if in fact we want to be more accessible to the public and stakeholders, our thought was that saying commissioner all the time set up a barrier. So we at the subcommittee, and there are probably other reasons too that I didn't just cover. People at the subcommittee felt very comfortable using first names. We didn't, I don't think it's appropriate to put in the bylaws, but we had that discussion. We thought it was important to tell you all that we had that discussion. And I think some of us hoped that we might have that discussion as a commission, whether it's now or some other time, doesn't matter, but I did promise people that I would raise the issue and report that we had been discussing it.
I agree. I would love to give the commissioner as a title. It reminds me, I had to go to the hospital some months ago, and you had to refer to doctors as doctor surname, and all the nurses were just by their first name.
Yep.
And it created this odd disparity that was uncomfortable to me, and I'll bet it's uncomfortable for the audience. Even today, I noticed staff are sometimes referred to by first names, and commissioners get the formal title. That seems fun.
I would like to give everybody permission just to call me Susan, but it's just me, and I don't know if.
Susan, I agree with that. I think the formality of commissioner diminishes conversation for us as a group.
That's true, but also working through this as I'm talking, for people who don't know us, who are observing, it could be confusing if you don't know what someone's first name is. That's the flip side, right? So I don't know how you reconcile those two things.
But we use each other's first names.
No, but like if the audience doesn't know my name's Jennifer, like there's two Jennifers also on this
Yeah.
commission, so we
Right.
have that too. And
Right.
like which Jennifer are people referring to? So I think there were 5 Jennifers in my 3rd grade class, by the way. That's kind of a common thing, but
You're so bitter about that.
we all had different iterations of our names, but, so that's the other thing I was kind of. Cause there were 5 Jennifers in my 3rd grade class that I was thinking about is how do you deal with that issue?
I don't know that's necessarily a problem, and by that I mean, this commission is so specific that the folks who would be speaking would know who the folks are on this commission, if that makes sense.
Do we have?
So you get to
I
have.
don't know, we have people we have legislators, we have legislative staff who watch these meetings, they don't know who we are.
Okay, but yeah, we also have placards, but I don't know.
That's true, that's true.
I guess I think of it, how it came up with, I think titles are weird and that they set up power dynamics that are based on something that's artificial. It's a title. Someone gave you that title, doesn't really mean anything. And for folks with lived experience, and at least in my experience in having community meetings, it sets up a hierarchy or a power structure of, I'm coming into a space where I'm already uncomfortable. And now I have to remember the rules of how I engage. And so we're trying to get at that and mitigate barriers to participation. I think an easy thing for us to do is not to use commissioner, but also introduce ourselves. We have to do that for the record when we are at the legislature. We just say for the record, my name is Jennifer Parrish Taylor, I'm a commissioner, I go by blah, blah, blah. I think there are ways that we can make it a little bit more inviting for folks to feel comfortable.
Again, I don't think it needs to be in bylaws, but
I don't think I could ever refer to Senator Polansky other than Senator Polansky.
Just don't call me late for dinner.
Yeah, right.
All right, so moving along, on subsection 9, public comment. Subsection 9B deals with written comment. And what it says is that submissions received by the close of business 2 business days in advance of the meeting in which they are to be considered shall be submitted to voting and non-voting members and posted to the public. Submissions received after that time shall be submitted to voting and non-voting members and posted after the close of the meeting. We mean this to give us enough time to really read and consider with dignity the input of the public when it's in writing. Stuff that's received the morning of the meeting, or as today, one thing in the middle of the meeting. We can't give it our full attention, and so this is meant to give us the breathing room to be able to treat public input with some dignity.
And still allow people to make public.
And still allow people to make written comments.
Well, you have to then adhere to that 7-day notice so people know what's gonna be on the agenda, so they have.
Absolutely do.
And just as a quick side note, the Oregon House has a number of things, it's 100% today, we have to check.
Be willing to share.
The other thing we do need is a closing time for written statements. The way it says here is afterwards, they can come in, there's gotta be a point
Oh,
where
sure,
you stop taking
sure.
Oh,
testimony
okay.
and decisions, at some point it would be made.
Good point. Well, what would you suggest as a closing time?
I would say 48 hours after, well, we need it before, I'm just thinking of the rules in terms of public testimony, we have 48 hours after the start of the public hearing, but we want it before, so.
The way, yeah, it varies, but one model is in the legislative one, when the committee starts, they have 48 hours from the beginning of the meeting time. So if you had a 1 o'clock meeting on a Wednesday, it would need to be posted by Friday at 1 o'clock.
What if the meeting's on Friday? You don't want to post it over the weekend?
No, in business days.
So 2 business days from the 48 hours, not counting weekends.
You know, one difference though is in the legislative process, like for your committees, you're not actually enacting the law with the decision that committee makes. It's still being considered throughout the legislative assembly. And so, you know, having that flexibility. Whereas if there's an action item for this commission, it's gonna be decided at that moment. And so that's where I would offer that insight into whether you want to, you know, allow testimony after an action item this commission's considering.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good point, Eric. So we probably would want to think about how to frame it, that it has to come in by a certain time prior to the action item being taken. Because usually an action item is going to be based on something that's already happened. So we've already had a public hearing, we've taken the information in, and it's not scheduled for action on the same day we're doing the public hearing. I would assume this is how this commission's worked in the past. If that's the case, then figure out what would be the time frame after the public hearing, but before the action item, because at some point you could actually load the record up.
You could, yeah, that's true. I mean, what if we just said for any action item, it's 48 hours prior to the meeting, full stop? That's just it. Because that'll give us time to deliberate on whatever we need to think about before the.
And people could still write their anger at the action that was taken, and let the commission know how horrible their decision was.
True.
So 48 hour limit on anger.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. I have nothing else on Article 4.
I have, on number 12, meeting records and minutes. I think that we should have a time limit that sets an expectation on when minutes and transcripts are going to be posted to the website after meetings.
What do you suggest?
I don't know. Let's,
It is a monumental amount of work to do the meeting minutes and the transcripts. Right now, the AI technology that we've tried to help has not been hugely helpful. We currently don't have the staffing resources to do it any more efficiently than we are doing it right now. That being said, the legislature did just allocate us a new position authority to hire us a commission staff member. So hopefully our ability to do this will improve once we have dedicated staff to do it. But right now, and we can go to the subject matter.
What's the
I don't
time?
know about how long it again to do the work.
What's-
On an average, it's probably, and I devote a good 2 solid days to it, probably get through it, but that's in between.
So 7 days.
Yeah, 7 days, 10 days? What's,
It's, at this point, it's what, right before the next meeting, so it's a month.
One thing I know we talked about this is the transcripts. And I talked to Susan about this, the Zoom transcripts, she's used to, I am not. And so we need to get better transcripts for you all, and I think our intent is to start going back to the way we were doing transcripts, in the fall. The minutes, though, usually you have to get the transcript before you can do the minutes, so that's the timeline thing, you know, I don't know how long it took you to get the transcripts from.
Shannon, I
Panda.
think they do, it's 4 to 7 minutes.
So getting that timely,
A little secret is you get the transcript that Zoom sends you and you save it as a PDF. And then it blows it up to a full screen, it separates everything and you can read it more easily. That being said, they're not always coherent because they separate things by paragraph, they separate things by time, paragraph. And they'll say who they think is speaking at the beginning of that paragraph, but the speaker can change in the middle of the paragraph and it doesn't tell you that the speaker has changed. So it takes a little bit of brain of salt reading through them, but once they're bigger and not in that tiny little Zoom print, you can actually start making some sense out of it.
So I have just maybe a more simple suggestion for now until have more robust ability. And that is to post a link to the video next to the meeting date. Because right now, I know where to find it, it's embedded in the agenda, you go back and you can click on it, but people don't know that. So if you actually just where the agendas are, where we put the link to the transcript for the minutes, just put the video link. And really, I'm thinking, of course, of the public being able to access the information.
Sure.
So the easiest place to get that is next to the agenda.
So do you
maybe
want
we just
something in
put
the-
some-
What are the videos captioned? Meaning like, if I go back and I looked at this, is there closed captioning so I know what's being said?
I don't know the answer to that. It's just a recording of the meeting, but I don't know if it's closed caption.
I don't think so.
So you might be able to turn it on.
Yeah, I know there's smart closed captioning that you can do through AI, but again, you have that same problem where it's like gibberish.
Yeah.
we do have the link here now, and I didn't actually know that, but,
Next to the,
yeah.
meeting
Recording, and you can put.
I see.
So do we want something in the bylaws about this? That's where we started. An expectation as to when meeting records and minutes will be posted to the website.
Well, we're still talking about a stopgap, aren't we? If we put the video up there, then we can tie the transcript has to be done before the video is taken down. That gives everybody access to the video.
So I think yes, and I think to the question about do we want something in there? I think we do, because this is the outward facing document. So members of the public want to know when we're going to have these things available, not just that we say we're going to have them.
So given
So-
that the staff isn't,
Say as soon as practicable or something.
Yeah, I don't want to put a specific
Right.
time.
as soon as practical.
Things happen.
But some acknowledge, so that it doesn't sound like it's just a platitude instead of,
All right, we'll get that in there as soon as practical.
The question is, why is the video not sufficient? It records
Because
everything.
you have to sit there for 3 hours and watch a video, you don't know when things are, or, I mean, I think if you had a transcript where you could search if you were looking for something, it would be
You can't.
But
best
there are
practice.
two questions, there are two things we're talking about. One is convenience or efficiency. Transcript's more efficient. I think printing everything out is more efficient than looking at it on a computer screen. So I agree with that. But the other thing we want to be is apparent in everything we're doing. And if there's a video out there, we are apparent. We may not be as convenient in the appearance.
But
I
it's
think
an
they want both,
accessibility
though,
issue,
right.
so yes, you may have a video, but what if I can't see? Or like, what if I can't hear rather?
I agree with I'm trying to meet OPDC's concern about how quickly they can get it out.
Right.
If the AI technology comes out, so it spurts everything out, we can say 5 days. But it's not, if we have the video out there, it's not that we're depriving people access to what we've done. And as soon as possible, we can try and get the transcript out there.
But I think that's what we're saying though, I think we're saying that like, the video is there, then as soon as we can, we'll put the transcript up.
But still
I
agree.
think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yes, we agree.
Yeah, I think you could put in there like all meeting materials which we have after the end of the meeting. And the link to the video shall be posted on the website within 5 days, if you want to say 5 days. Transcript shall be posted and available to the public as soon as practicable.
Exactly.
Oh, gosh, should we put pictures up?
I'll chime in on this from a communications standpoint. So we just recently got Lisa Taylor, Government Relations for the record. We just recently got a communications position on a month ago or so. We're getting this, commission administrator position, I think within the next month or so. I think this might be, I know you need something for the bylaws, but I think this might be a solution that we get a work group together with those staff members and maybe a commission member to talk about how we can solve this outside the bylaw process, because transcripts are taking a lot of staff time. And I think there's a lot of technological solutions we could find for this, like the legislature, you have the video, but you have the agenda, you click on an agenda and it'll jump you right to that point, so.
Right,
I think that.
thank you, that's great, thank you, that's a great suggestion.
Well, we have our new CIO as well.
Yeah.
So we might have a solution that may not require putting it in.
And I looked on the agenda, thank you, I went, like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, and there wasn't a recording link, so that's wonderful, sorry I brought it up.
There's different goals here, like for the, video is like a transparency, you want everyone to be able to see the hearing, but we've had this debate, it's going back a few years, where the commissioners prefer transcripts or minutes, and, you know, with the transcript, you're getting everything verbatim, with the minutes, it's a shorter read, but it's someone else's summary, and so, we have gone back and forth on that, and, you know, the transcripts are simpler, we can continue to do minutes in addition to the transcripts, if that's what this commission, wants, but it does take more time.
Anything else in Article 4? How are we doing? It's 4 o'clock.
We're getting close, but you're really close too. I think you can
Close.
do this in 15 minutes.
I will do my best to do this in 15 minutes. There's, without going into the details of stuff that is there are two big issues here. One that I want to, tag first of all, because I can just say we're gonna work on it, is the audit committee. It says now that it's not a governing body, but if you look at, the definition in the public meetings laws, the audit committee might be a governing body, depending on how you interpret certain words, in which case it would then be subject to the public meeting laws, but Eric suggests that maybe the audit committee is really not a governing body, even if you look at the words of that statute. So this is something where we're gonna have to go back to the Justice Department to get some guidance on how we deal with the audit committee. I know that Rob also had some other language that he wanted to add here, but I'd like to suggest, Rob, that since we're gonna be redoing this whole paragraph anyway, at the next subcommittee meeting, we could deal with your language. So the other thing that I wanted to mention here is that one of the things that we discussed at the subcommittee, but left it unresolved, is whether the bylaws should set out any specific standing subcommittees. And there were two types of subcommittees that various people suggested might be listed as standing subcommittees. One is the governance subcommittee, because the anticipation is that it will continue to have work to do. And the other was legislative subcommittee that I would like to suggest that Director Camphy talk about the need or the possible need for such a subcommittee.
Sure. The agency, is undergoing a lot of change, and a lot of it has been, driven by legislation, specifically Senate Bill 337, as well as some budget notes that have come along. And part of that change process has, been a number of reports that the agency is required to produce, either annually or quarterly. And the quarterly reports are on a very tight timeline for the commission, the full commission, to be able to review and approve. For example, we have we have quarterly reports that are due to the legislature in the end of April, I think April 22nd, for the May legislative days. Given the timing from when our last reports were due, we'll have to get those to the commission in the April commission meeting to review. But it would, to review and approve in the same meeting, because otherwise we would have to get the reports to you all today, to review. And then by the time that the report is turned into the legislature, the information in it would be 2 months old, for the legislative hearing. And for a quarterly report, if we're turning in information that's 2 months old, we're always gonna be like a quarter behind in what we're reporting to the legislature. So I think it would be really helpful if we had a subcommittee that can do the review work with us and then be making recommendations to the full commission, at the meeting prior to the reports being turned in. So there would still be an opportunity for the full commission to have the report 7 days before the commission meeting, have a conversation about it, but there would also have been commission involvement in the review work leading up to that meeting. And I think that's a way that we could more meaningfully engage the commission in its oversight function, while also being able to provide the legislature with information that is more current.
So there's two ways, it seems to me, that we could go about having such a subcommittee. One is that the chair could just say we're having that kind of subcommittee, or we could take a vote on having that kind of subcommittee, and then it would happen. The other is to put it in the bylaws that such a subcommittee would exist. And the governance subcommittee didn't come up with a decision on that, so it's open for discussion.
What is the purpose of the audit committee? What is it going to give to us?
Oh,
To go over?
the audit committee right now is not considered to be a subcommittee.
The audit committee is a separate entity that is independent from the commission, is not technically a subcommittee of the commission, but its charter, it was from a budget note from 2021. The audit committee is independent. There is one commissioner who's on the audit committee, that's Commissioner Harris. And that committee reports, makes an audit plan and an audit report, and reports directly to the commission.
And because it reports to the commission, it comes under the definition of governing body in 192.61075.
And what are they on?
And to be clear, the audit committee is not created by the budget note. So there was a budget note that said the agency will have internal auditors. And that those internal auditors report to the commission, not to the director. And so in order to facilitate that function, the best practice is to have an audit committee with commission involvement that then reports directly to the commission. So the audit committee itself is a best practice rather than a budget note.
Right.
They are internal auditors, and so they audit agency programs and agency functions.
And does the committee itself set its own agenda, or does the commission say we want this to be done?
The committee has historically set its own agenda.
So I did some reading on this. I've only been to one meeting. I've never been on an audit committee before, but, and thank you for the information you sent me. There are some standard practices for auditors, and this is an internal audit committee that looks at procedures and policies and makes sure that they're achieving their goals and they're being efficient and they're minimizing risks. It's a big risk management thing, honestly, too. Because they're auditing internally, they need to be independent from management.
Right.
And so there's requirements, there's a long, I don't know how many pages that was, but it was 20 or 30 pages of best practices, which I finally got through this week. But they create their own charter. So you'll have a couple of auditors and some outside people that form this committee. And John Hutzler is the chair, and Mr. Hutzler was the auditor for Washington County for about 20 years. I think they have the current Clackamas County auditor on the committee. The auditors doing the auditing, I think either are part or advise the committee, I'm not exactly sure. They have a charter, they create their own charter, and the charter adopts best practices. They'll have and we voted on, the audit schedule and everything. Their job is to look at this agency. They're sort of like internal investigators when you think about it. And so because of that, they're not reporting to the executive director, the deputy director. They're coming to us and saying, this is what we're finding. And so what I believe we should probably do in the bylaws, I need to look at this a little more, do a little more reading, establish it, authorize it, review their charter that they draft, because we have to approve their charter. And so that's our oversight of them.
Okay.
And so it is an independent, sort of an internal investigative thing that we work with together. And they can advise the agency on changes maybe as well. So that's sort of a thumbnail of what we're doing. When we get down to putting the language in bylaws, it'll probably be relatively brief like this, because the more I read about this, the more this thing is governed by their charter and professional standard guidelines that are nationally accepted.
And what Director Campy said, I think, is really important, that we need to clarify in that charter and take a look at as it's being drafted, is that it is the internal auditors that report to the commission, and the committee, the audit committee, works with those internal auditors. And so that's the flow of direction and providing information to the commission. I think that impacts whether it's a public body or a public meeting, that piece, because if the audit committee is informing the auditor, they're not a subgroup of the commission, and we don't need to worry about whether public meeting law applies to those committee meetings, because they're informing the auditor, who in their individual employee capacity is informing the commission.
Okay, so we'll deal with all that. Getting back to the issue of whether things like the governance committee and a legislative subcommittee should be standing committees mentioned in the bylaws, or just ones that we create more or less ad hoc through the chair. Do people have feelings about that, or?
Certainly, I think the governance subcommittee, we haven't worked, and it seems like the needs of the governance subcommittee seem to be kind of bubbling to the surface on a constant basis. I would suggest that the governance subcommittee probably needs to exist within the context of the bylaws.
I think that's also, I agree, thank you, and I think that's also true for the legislative committee, because from a governance perspective, the issues that have been identified by the executive director are not going to ever be able to be mitigated there are always going to be timing issues. We won't ever be able to schedule meetings based on various different reports that come up from time to time. So I think there will be an ongoing need for a legislative committee, and it makes sense to have that in the bylaws because that issue is not going to go away.
So we'll have to make it clear what the duties of these committees are. I would very much like to have input from Director Campy and from Chair Nash and from anyone else about what that language should be setting up these standing committees. I think this is tricky, and it would be really, really helpful for the governance subcommittee to have language suggested by other people if that's at all possible.
Related to that, something that I think that I talked with Director Campy about is that sometimes the timing of those reports will be problematic, even with a legislative committee. And if there are changes that need to be made between the time that the commission approves a report and the time it needs to go to the legislature, there needs to be some mechanism in place for that to happen. And perhaps we need to put that in the bylaws, either that the chair can approve those changes or the chair of the legislative committee or something. But I think that is a governance issue that we should address too, so that we make sure that someone on the commission, if changes need to be made, I mean, we don't want to approve a report and then have a different report sent in. Because something needs to happen. So I think rather than having to call an emergency meeting, is there some way, I think we need to address that issue when it comes up.
Well, we did have a discussion on the governance subcommittee about whether or not, if there's a legislative subcommittee, whether or not the legislative subcommittee could review the legislation and recommend it for review.
Well, that's what they'd have to do, the subcommittee would have to do.
So I think,
Yeah, thanks. Again, Lisa Taylor. I would just make a couple of recommendations. I really appreciate Chair Nash's comments about edits that have to be made. For example, with these reports coming up, even without the legislative committee, there's gonna be about a week between the commission and hopefully approving the reports and when we submit them to the legislative fiscal office. And in that week, I kind of anticipated making minor changes to anything that comes up during the commission meeting. And maybe just a written email from the chair or whoever is decided saying, yeah, final approval with those changes. I'm also thinking that you might want to differentiate those type of edits. So major changes might be, you need to go through a different process than minor edits. And then in terms of timing, I wouldn't anticipate we're not gonna be submitting the report to the legislative committee, especially if there's a 7-day posting period. I think because that would put us 2 weeks probably before a report would be due to the committee. So like, if we back up enough, that gives staff a very limited window to get reports done. So I would envision the legislative committee being more of, here's the current draft. What do you think of this current draft? Whether that's, you want us to post that current draft, or if it's just something that we bring to the committee. I mean, even a week of drafting changes a report quite a bit, so. Yeah.
all right, well, we'll struggle with that one as well.
So we have a couple minutes and I know we're very close to being done. So if we're okay.
I'm still pondering, right, what we're just
I
talking
wasn't
about now,
gonna
these
adjourn.
various committees we're talking about right now are ones that are under 3 advisory committees.
No, these are subcommittees.
There's,
We're talking about subcommittees under subsection 1. Under Article 5, subsection 1.
Right, so that, I'm just looking to see because,
We haven't gotten down to advisory committees yet.
all right, but then I'm gonna go back to what Eric was talking about, internal auditor. Who is the internal auditor to the commission or to the agency right now? Or do we have?
So we have a contracted internal auditor, Lincoln Sack, and his position is ending in the end of the month, the end of April. And then Scott Martin, is his last name? Scott Martin is the agency's staff internal auditor.
agency, what?
He's employed by the agency.
The staff internal monitor. Auditor is also.
So we have someone under contract that's independent. He, she is or the point person. I'm just trying to get.
He's not independent, he's just not an employee, he's an independent contractor.
Mhm.
And then so that position will be vacant. Essentially, and then there's an employee that's an internal auditor. Yes, that's correct.
And then there's an audit committee.
And so the audit committee reports to the internal person.
No, the audit committee reports to the commission.
I'm not, so, for the record, it's Derek Dietrich. The way this was created was absent anyone who's currently with the agency. The way I think it should be structured is that the committee should report to the internal auditors, that they're the position that was legislatively authorized with a job description of reporting to this commission. I'm not sure how much reporting has happened in a year and a half or so since it was created, but.
Well, Rob and just before we get to that, so what I was going to suggest is we're really scheduled to adjourn at 4:30. We have dinner at 6. If people are comfortable going a little long, I think we can wrap this up. By a little long, I mean like 15 more minutes, maybe 4:45.
I actually thought we went until 5.
Not,
I know the agenda doesn't say that, but one I saw earlier.
so no,
I had intended to wrap at 4:30 and then have an opportunity to have commission members, have a
Oh, yeah, the
listening
IT.
session with our IT folks to gather information about the IT challenges, so that we can work towards solutions.
so if we're okay going a little bit longer, I think we can close the bylaw discussion. Everybody, okay, we're not in. So Rob and I met with John Hutzler on March 13th to have this discussion. Like, okay, who are you and what are you really doing? Because we don't understand. So we had a very nice, very frank, very insightful conversation where he explained how he came to be with our entity and what they do. And Rob, jump in and correct me if I get this wrong, but basically, he said that it was Latham Stack who basically recruited him and then he recruited other members of the audit committee, that it was because of the budget note in 2021. And that the audit committee creates its own charter and audit schedule, but the audit schedule is informed by the needs of the agency. Because the audit committee also has members, the executive director, the internal auditor, auditor for the agency, the member of the commission, and other employees of the agency are on the audit committee, and they say, I'm just making this up, but no, you don't really want to audit that because we have this other really important thing that we think you need to be paying attention to because this may be a risk. And then they get to just take it and do whatever it is that they're going to do, the audit committee. So the audit committee ultimately says yes, no, maybe, but the agency helps. The agency basically gives, this is what we think you should be doing, and they can decide whether or not they agree with that. And then they develop an audit schedule, and then the agency's auditor executes the audit and reports back to the audit committee, who reports to us. Is that basically?
I think so, and there's timelines, like they have to do an annual report, which I think they did their annual
Yeah,
report
they did.
last time. And then they also report as needed if there's an enhanced risk, I think was the term they used. And yeah, and that's sort of what they have been doing apparently.
And they're all volunteers,
Yeah, they're
except for
all-
the employed auditors.
And the professional auditors seem very knowledgeable.
And this is like a normal thing in state agencies.
Yeah,
Apparently, and
I'm just not familiar with it.
Yeah.
It just seems to me you've got a group internally that runs their own agenda, doing whatever they want to, and I'm just trying to figure out who do they answer to. Understand they come back to the commission and we give some type of overview. But what's to stop I don't know if it's the internal auditor or the committee itself saying, we're gonna go this path, and it's just like drama.
the executive director could tell us that.
I mean, I could inform the independent audits function is separate and independent from the executive director, and it needs to be for them to provide oversight, because otherwise you could have a director that is trying to
Totally.
do corruption or something of that nature. So I can't tell the independent auditors what to and not to audit. I can offer agency priorities to them, which they can choose to incorporate or disregard. Ultimately, they report back to the commission.
Yeah, I think the.
Brett, you were on that committee too, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that's Chair Knapp. If I could add some clarity, Rob Miller, Chief Financial Commission. So the normal process is that on a yearly or bi-yearly basis, the internal auditor does a risk assessment of the agency. It goes out there, interviews all the managers and areas of the agency and says, identify your risks and here's a matrix of what you think is pertinent, what you think is gonna be a problem and everything else. You put together this big matrix that says, this is what's happening in the agency, these are the risks in the agency, how do you want to proceed from that? They then offer some suggestions about what should happen and what should be audited. They take that and they visit with the executive team and the managers, say, this is what the risk matrix is saying, are risks to the agency and what's going on going forward. Then they take that to the audit committee and say, based on this, this is where we see these risks. And we've already visited with the agency, and then we talk to the audit committee. Then the audit committee is supposed to say, yea or nay, based on this, and this is what we suggest. From that, then they're supposed to take it to the commission and say, based on all these things that we've done to get to this point, this is what we would like to have our audit plan look like going forward. The commission would then say, yes or no, or we think something different. And that's what we have commissioners on the committee. And then from there, that's the plan that's set out for the next year or two, usually it's a 2-year plan. And it goes in, it's revised every year, it's looked at every single year. That's how it's supposed to work. It's been a bit disjointed because of the transparency of the agency over the last few years. But that's how we just had a meeting, a couple meetings about this, and getting it more on track as we go forward. So hopefully that added some clarity for
Yes,
how the
thank you.
process normally works in other agencies, and we're just trying to get it on track.
I need to clarify, that Robin serves extra cookies for being on the audit committee.
When I asked him, he said, I'm sorry, you've reached the number that has been.
And then I said, well, I'm coming off that governance committee, right?
Yeah,
And
sure.
we did submit an audit report to the legislature last session, to help them, so.
Yeah. All right, so thank you. If there are no other questions about that, we'll continue with the.
The rest is just to clarify why some of the things that are there. When we get to advisory committees and work groups, we wanted to be sure, that it was clear that, the, executive director and the chair could put together these advisory committees or work groups, and that they had the authority to pretty much bring whoever they thought would be useful and helpful onto those committees and work groups, including legislators. And there was a comment to me, somebody sent me an email, a member of a stakeholder, who pointed out that since that it was important to get input from legislators who were from all parties in the legislature. And so putting legislators in there broadly would allow certainly the executive director to bring in legislators with certain expertise, legislators from a political party not currently represented on the commission, if it seemed important to see whether the points of view were festering out there and so forth. So that's why that is in there the way it is. And other than that, I have no, in the grievance procedure, Article 6, the goal was to delineate the responsibility of the executive director and staff versus the commission. We understand that it's not a clear division of labor, but it was our attempt to try to, channel certain kinds of grievances in one direction or another. There's provisions in there for things to be referred back and forth, between the commission and the agency, if that's, advisable. And our goal in subsection 4 was to create a paper trail so that there would be a record going forward of how things were dealt with, and so that everybody could be protected by having things down on paper. So that's all that I have to say. If anyone else has anything they'd like to raise, I guess this would be the time to raise it.
I have a question. The question is, did the governance subcommittee discuss any guidelines in the bylaws for commission members communicating with the press?
We did not discuss communications with the press.
That was one of the things that when we had our onboarding, DOJ suggested we do. So that should probably,
Comms person, I would think that we get some guidance from them.
yeah, but I mean, like as a policy, just.
There's a
You're not trying
general
to say-
statement in Article 2, Section 7, the role of the chair, which says that the chair is the public liaison of the commission members. It shall be the responsibility of the chair or other persons as directed by the chair to speak on behalf of the commission members for official information concerning the OPDC. So that's not directly on point, but at least that's kind of one of the things I was thinking of as it was being discussed, was that was the expectation at least.
Okay.
If you think there should be more specific guidance about dealing with the press, we can certainly try to articulate.
Well, I don't really want people to feel like they can't talk to the press if they're approached by the press. And so I kind of I wanted to have the governance committee to have a discussion about some, I don't know, some guidelines about that, so people could, if they, well, I guess we should have a value discussion about that. Do we want me speaking for everyone, or do we want people to have the ability to speak for themselves? And if we do that, how do we do that? Do we have goals? Do we have, values? Do we have things that we all agree on that we will communicate if we're communicating individually with the press? I wanted to have that kind of discussion.
It's what capacity is the individual communicating with the media?
Right.
Because if they're not authorized by you as the chair, they can't speak on behalf of, they can maybe speak as an individual.
Right.
And whether we need more guidance on that, for executive agency type of approach, then, that's something we should
Right.
get, more information on, but it just needs to be really clear, because there are gonna be those times, because anyone can go on the website to see who's the members and just start calling
Right.
and see how many different answers they get.
But I guess not just members of the press, but other people too. And one of the very first questions was, these people are calling me, what do I do? So, I mean, I think having that in the bylaws would be helpful for.
Just to be clear, the press wasn't called.
Not the press, right, other people, lobbyists.
Do you all want to give us some guidance, or do you want to leave it to us to come up with something?
I'm a big believer in free speech.
In other words, at our next committee meeting, you would like to be part of the discussion coming up with something.
Meaning that individual members do not speak for the commission as a whole unless they're authorized to do so.
Okay.
And they shall. It goes without saying, make sure that we talk, you understand.
Yeah, you have a disclaimer.
Yeah.
Got it.
Right, with that, if there's no other comments, a couple about the bylaws, is there anything else that anyone would like to add?
My understanding is that you're authorizing us to go back to the governance committee, discuss all the things that we said we would discuss or amend, come up with another draft, and have it ready for the commission at the April meeting. Is that accurate?
Yes,
All right.
that is accurate.
Thank you, governance committee.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you very much, wonderful work. All right, couple of
So I think that, does that end our public meeting?
That does end our public meeting, and I was going to, just conclude the public meeting, but also say that we will be back tomorrow at 9 o'clock for, second public meeting. That is our more formal, commission meeting. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
You can do it. Is anyone opposed? All right, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
And so we do have agency staff